Chapter 1277. Since he was defeated by Chu Xiu in the arena, Xinyuan Wushuang hadn't fought with Chu Xiu for a long time. Although he didn't want to admit it, the reality had told him that he was no longer a match for Chu Xiu. Under halberd, there was a series of explosions. The powerful force even made Xinyuan Wushuang unable to hold halberd in his hand. Under the attack of Chu Xiu's long saber, he was directly blown away. Xinyuan Wushuang pinched a seal with both hands. The golden radiance turned into talismans and smashed down like a huge seal with the power to split mountains. But the next moment, the heaven cries blood rain suddenly fell from the sky. The huge demon god phantom directly crushed the seal. Chu Xiu's fist smashed down, and a powerful force suddenly erupted. Xinyuan Wushuang was directly hit by Chu Xiu's fist and flew away while vomiting blood. The cruel reality told Xinyuan Wushuang that Chu Xiu was even more powerful than he had imagined. If he didn't face Chu Xiu as an enemy, he would never know how terrifying Chu Xiu was. There was no fighting spirit in Xinyuan Wushuang's eyes, only fear. When facing an evenly matched enemy, even if the enemy was a little stronger than him, he would still have fighting spirit and was not afraid to fight. But now, facing an existence like Chu Xiu, fighting spirit was useless except for courting death. Chu Xiu, I'm still the heir of High Heaven Sect. If you kill me, High Heaven Sect will definitely fight you to the death. Xinyuan Wushuang shouted fiercely, but his tone was somewhat fierce. After all, he had seen the scene where Chu Xiu killed Xinjiao. Xinjiao was the temple master of one of the three main palaces of Sanskrit sect, an expert in the martial immortal realm. However, Chu Xiu still dared to kill him. It was conceivable what kind of attitude Chu Xiu would have when facing Xinyuan Wushuang. Chu Xiu raised his brow and said, "You're right, your High Heaven Sect still owes me a favor. If I kill you, High Heaven Sect will definitely not acknowledge the debt. It would be a huge loss." Hearing Chu Xiu's words, Xinyuan Wushuang could not help heaving a sigh of relief. No matter what the other party's concerns were, as long as they didn't kill him, everything would be fine. However, at this moment, Xinyuan Wushuang was horrified to find that a ferocious and terrifying demonic shadow had appeared under his feet and entangled him. Xinyuan Wushuang wanted to break free, but the demon shadow followed him like a shadow, directly breaking out a powerful demon qi, shattering his meridians and wrapping him in it. Xinyuan Wushuang spat out blood and roared, "Chu Xiu! You said you won't kill me." Chu Xiu spread out his hands and said, "If I kill you, it will be troublesome, but if you are killed by the demonic ghosts, it will have nothing to do with me. There are so many dangers in the central province, and this city of wrongful deaths is extremely strange. You are so weak, but you insisted on entering it. It's normal for you to die, isn't it?" Hearing this, Xinyuan Wushuang's expression suddenly changed, and he struggled more fiercely. However, Chu Xiu shouted to Lu Jianghe, "Lead those demonic ghosts here." When Chu Xiu was fighting, Lu Jianghe had been dealing with the demonic ghosts except for stopping Chenjiolong and Su Jiang. Now that he heard Chu Xiu's voice, he continued to lead the demonic ghost over while complaining, "Can't you move faster? It's very tiring for me to carry these things alone." Chu Xiu ignored Xinyuan Wushuang's complaints. He directly manipulated the fate devil force and threw Xinyuan Wushuang into the crowd of demons and ghosts. Seeing himself being swallowed by those demonic ghosts, Xinyuan Wushuang roared, "Chu Xiu! You will die a horrible death." However, as soon as he shouted, he was completely swallowed by those demonic ghosts and torn into a blood mist. Lu Jiang couldn't help shaking his head and said, "Why don't you break that guy's mouth? It's not worth it to be scolded before he dies." In fact, sometimes being scolded is a good thing, Chu Xiu said with a serious face. "A good thing? What kind of logic is that?" Chu Xiu stood with his hands clasped behind his back and said lightly, "Only when someone scolds and hates you will you have the motivation to live a better life. If one day no one even scolds and hates you, it will be a kind of loneliness." Lu Jianghe sneered, "Pretentious. What did you say?" Lu Jianghe immediately corrected himself. "I say, why are you putting in so much effort? Why don't you just kill that brat? No one saw it. Why do you have to frame the demonic ghost? What a waste of energy." Chu Xiu shook his head and said, "It's not a waste of effort. Although Xianyuan Wushuang has disappointed High Heaven Sect, he is still the successor of High Heaven Sect. For a top sect like High Heaven Sect, it's impossible for them not to work hard on their successor. Knowing that the opening of Daluo Divine Palace is extremely dangerous, they must be prepared. It's better to be prepared. The favor that High Heaven Sect owes me is very useful to me. I don't want to lose it like this." In fact, if Xianyuan Wushuang hadn't courted death this time, Chu Xiu really wouldn't have wanted to kill him. In the Daluotian continent, Chu Xiu couldn't just defend people. He also wanted to make use of some forces that he could use. The Eastern Territory was the first place he appeared in, and he was the most famous in the Eastern Territory. Among the 3 major sects in the Eastern Territory, except for Cold River City, who had a grudge against him, High Heaven Sect and Imperial Sky Pavilion could be used by him. Therefore, Chu Xiu actually didn't want to fight to the death with High Heaven Sect. However, Xianyuan Wushuang always made trouble for him. Although Xianyuan Wushuang's strength wasn't very good, he was the successor of High Heaven Sect. It had to be said that he could really cause a lot of trouble for Chu Xiu. When those demonic ghosts completely tore Xianyuan Wushuang into pieces and turned their attention to them, Chu Xiu left with Lu Jianghe. It wasn't that he was afraid of these demonic ghosts, but that these demonic ghosts, as the murderer, couldn't die in his hands. At this time, in the High Heaven Sect, Fang Yinglong, Qin Baiyuan, and the 3 martial immortals of High Heaven Sect, Linghu Immortal Mountain, were all there. Although the Daluo Divine Palace would only be open for a month, they couldn't rest easy. After all, their High Heaven Sect had thrown in more than a dozen people at once, and the weakest one was in the true fire spirit refinement realm. Losing one was enough to make them feel distressed. Of course, from a rational point of view, as long as the Daluo Divine Palace was open, it was impossible that no one would die. The only difference was that their gains might be more than their losses. At this time, Fang Yinglong suddenly said, "Why do I always feel a little uneasy?" Fang Yinglong was at the 8th heaven of Martial Immortal, but he was undoubtedly closer to the sky than the other 2, so his perception was also more sensitive. Qin Baiyuan frowned and said, "Could it be that something happened to Wushuang?" Although Xianyuan Wushuang's performance had disappointed them recently, Xianyuan Wushuang was, after all, a talent that they had cultivated. They had watched Xianyuan Wushuang grow up and had always cultivated him as their successor. This kind of relationship could be said to have exceeded that of ordinary disciples. Therefore, even if Xianyuan Wushuang had disappointed them and been punished severely, it was only because he didn't strive hard. If they really wanted to give up on Xianyuan Wushuang, they only needed to give an order to strip him of his status as the successor of High Heaven Sect. Fang Yinglong frowned and said, "The Daluo Divine Palace is opening ahead of schedule this time, and it's a little strange. I'm afraid that those demonic ghosts are restless again. The degree of danger is presumably greater than the previous times." As Fang Yinglong spoke, his expression suddenly changed, and he took out a jade pendant from his bosom. The jade pendant was very strange, with a black surface and a crystal in the center that looked like a blood-red eye. At this moment, the crystal was still emitting a faint red glow. Fang Yinglong directly crushed it, and with a flash of light, a scene appeared in front of the 3 of them. It was the scene of countless ferocious demonic ghosts tearing Xianyuan Wushuang apart. The 3 people present were all silent. After a long while, Qin Baiyuan said in a hoarse voice, "Sect Master, gather the disciples and prepare for a new successor." Xianyuan Wushuang, the successor they had cultivated for decades, was dead. Were they sad? Of course they were sad. But they could only grieve. From the moment they entered the central province, they had been prepared for this. A sect wouldn't collapse even if it lost someone. This was true even for Fang Yinglong, the sect master, not to mention Xianyuan Wushuang, who was just a successor. If he died, the High Heaven Sect would continue to pass on. At this time, in the city of wrongful deaths, Chu Xiu was also continuing to hunt demonic ghosts. Previously, Chu Xiu had hunted demonic ghosts for the soul crystals. But now, he mainly hunted demonic ghosts for the ghost generals that had their own consciousness and could condense different elemental powers. The soul crystals of such special ghost generals could provide extremely pure power. Even if Chu Xiu didn't need them himself, he could give them to Lu Fengxian and the others, which could help them quickly condense power and reach the bottleneck. Even Mei Qinglian, who had just stepped into the early stage of the metaphysic realm of heaven and earth, could reach the peak as long as she chose the right attribute and refined several soul crystals. However, what made Chu Xiu feel strange was that there seemed to be something wrong with the city of wrongful deaths. This place seemed to be the base camp of demonic ghosts. In the houses were soul crystals and unformed demonic ghosts. Moreover, those ghost generals and other demonic ghosts should be responsible for patrolling the city, so there should be higher-level demonic ghosts above them. But Chu Xiu didn't see any. And now, although Chu Xiu was in a state of disorientation, he had been walking in the same direction. According to the distance, he should have arrived in front of the Daluo Divine Palace by now. But in fact, he was still wandering aimlessly in the city of wrongful deaths. This huge city full of demonic ghosts seemed to have no end. Perhaps it was because of Chu Xiu's murmur, but as soon as he finished this thought, a sharp howl suddenly came from the city of wrongful deaths. A huge white figure floated in the air like a dark cloud, but upon closer inspection, it turned out to be a monster formed by countless souls. Chapter 1278. After being in the city of the vein for so long, most of the things that Chu Xiu had seen were ordinary demonic ghosts and ghost generals. This thing was definitely not normal. Even the demonic ghosts in the outside world had never seen such a ferocious and terrifying thing. These human-shaped souls formed together. Chu Xiu and Lu Jianghu only glanced at it and felt a sharp pain in their spirit. It was precisely because they glanced at it that the thing seemed to be stimulated and rushed straight towards them. "What is this thing?" Lu Jianghu could not help but exclaim. Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, "I don't know what it is, but I know that if we don't run away quickly, we might die if this thing catches up to us. I have the 6 paths of reincarnation bracelet and the power of my spirit is strong enough, so I might be fine. But you might not be able to." Lu Jianghu shrank his neck and immediately turned around to escape. He even used the blood escape. Although Chu Xiu was also running, he was not that afraid. Although this thing looked evil, it was not enough to make him feel threatened. Therefore, he even had the time to look at some of the details of this thing. The other party seemed to be a monster formed by countless souls, but in fact, it was a whole body. However, a large piece of the monster's body seemed to have been torn off by someone. Who had such strength? Was it Fa Jing or Su Guishan of the 3 Pure Temple? While Chu Xiu was still puzzled, Lu Jianghu suddenly shouted, "F***CK. What is that thing in front of us?" Although Lu Jianghu usually behaved like a coward, he was someone who had participated in the righteous and demonic wars 500 years ago after all. He had also experienced countless battles. Although he was cowardly, there were few things that could make him lose his composure. However, Lu Jianghu was really afraid now. Even his voice seemed to be trembling. Chu Xiu followed Lu Jianghu's gaze and saw that the entire area in front of the city of the vein was wrapped in a powerful storm. Within the storm, there were countless demonic ghosts wrapped within. Previously, Chu Xiu was still wondering why there were only ordinary demonic ghosts patrolling the streets in such a large city of vain deaths, and the strongest ones were only ghost generals. Now he finally understood that the truly powerful demonic ghosts were all here. These demonic ghosts were no longer in a fixed state. There were all kinds of them. Some looked like demonic gods and were hundreds of meters tall. There were also some with human heads and beast bodies, looking incomparably savage. There were even some grotesquely shaped ones with 3 faces and 4 arms, like gods and Buddhas. There were also some that were like the thing that was chasing after Chu Xiu. It was impossible to describe their shapes. The storm was like a whirlpool, shrouding everything within it and constantly killing them. Occasionally, 1 or 2 demonic ghosts would be torn in half, but they would escape and disappear in the blink of an eye. When the demonic ghost that was chasing after Chu Xiu saw the storm, its power fluctuation was filled with terror. It immediately turned around and tried to escape. However, at that moment, the storm became even stronger. It actually pulled Chu Xiu and Lu Jianghu into it, causing them to be involuntarily twisted along with the storm. F***CK. What the hell is this? Lu Jiang, he was surrounded by blood-red aura. His power had risen to the extreme. Chu Xiu was in a slightly better state. After sensing the surrounding power, Chu Xiu let out a long breath and said, "It's the power of rules. It's the power of rules that is calming this distorted land." What? Lu Jiang, he did not understand. Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, "You have not reached the martial immortal realm, so you cannot sense the power of rules. The rules of the central province are actually distorted, which is why demonic ghosts are born. However, the power within the storm was restoring order, and the distorted power was once again calming down. Look at those demonic ghosts. They have probably surpassed the limits of high-grade demonic ghosts and are strong enough to fight martial immortals. However, in this environment, their bodies are gradually disintegrating and turning into normal demonic ghosts. If my guess is correct, in the end, they will most likely turn into soul crystals and their souls will scatter. Forget about those demonic ghosts for now. Let's think about ourselves first. Lu Jiang, he had a wretched expression. The power of this storm is so strong. If we are trapped here, we will be torn apart sooner or later. Chu Xiu frowned and thought for a moment, then said, "Let's go to the center and take a look." Are you crazy? If there is such a powerful force in the periphery, won't we be torn apart if we go to the center of the storm? The center of the storm is the calmest. Besides, staying here is just waiting for death. Why don't we go to the center and see what caused this storm? Although the power of the storm was strong, the power that calmed the rules was mainly targeted at demonic ghosts and not humans. Therefore, according to Chu Xiu's speculation, the center of the storm should be the safest. The power there should be closer to the outside world, and not the distorted central province. Lu Jiang, he was not confident, but he still followed Chu Xiu straight into the center of the storm. The deeper they went, the stronger the pulling force of the storm became. They could only use all their strength to maintain their balance, allowing the storm to pull them in. The scenery along the way left Chu Xiu and Lu Jiang, he dumbfounded. In the center of the storm, all the powers were being divided. Wind, thunder, water, fire, mountains, and lakes. The power of the rules had already materialized in front of Chu Xiu and Lu Jiang, his eyes. They were like colorful threads that interweaved in the void and formed the framework of an entire world. Chu Xiu and Lu Jiang, he were mesmerized by the sight, especially Chu Xiu. Lu Jiang, his cultivation hadn't reached that level yet, so he was still a little confused by these things and couldn't understand much. However, Chu Xiu had come into contact with the power of the rules for more than a day or two. Combat arts were a kind of materialization of the power of the rules, and these threads were the rules themselves. This kind of power was directly presented to Chu Xiu, and Chu Xiu couldn't help but feel intoxicated by it. Even if Chu Xiu hadn't been able to enter the exalted divine palace to cultivate this time, he was still confident that he could step into the martial immortal realm with just the blessings he'd received. Off to the side, Lu Jiang, he murmured, "We've struck it rich. We've struck it rich." Previously, he'd been complaining that he'd followed Chu Xiu into the city of the wronged, but now he didn't feel that way. Although his comprehension wasn't as much as Chu Xiu's, even a trace of it was enough for him to touch the edge of the power of the rules and step into the realm of half-step martial immortal. When they passed through this strange region of laws, Chu Xiu suddenly froze. He stared ahead and exclaimed in disbelief, "Elder Wei!" What appeared before Chu Xiu was a region that seemed to have been cut apart. Half of the rules had been restored, and the power of the rules was the same as the outside world, a pile of yellow sand. The other half was filled with broken rules, just like what they'd seen before. Right now, an old man in a black robe was sitting cross-legged in the middle of those two places. It was none other than Wei Shuya, whom Chu Xiu had been searching for all this time but to no avail. At this moment, Wei Shuya was sitting cross-legged, but there were countless soul crystals floating around him. Each of these soul crystals had the figure of a demonic ghost, constantly revolving around Wei Shuya, trying to seep into his heart. Wei Shuya's brows were tightly knitted, and his expression kept changing. Clearly, he was being attacked by the demonic ghosts in the illusion. Lu Jiang, he was also staring at Wei Shuya's silhouette, and his jaw dropped. Is this real or fake? It wasn't that Lu Jianghe was being paranoid, but Wei Shiya's appearance here was simply too strange. Given Wei Shiya's strength, it wouldn't have been a problem for him to barge into the central region of the Central Plains. However, they couldn't find Wei Shiya in the periphery, and there was no sign of him in the central region of the Central Plains. Who would have thought that Wei Shiya would appear here? This was simply incomprehensible. Chu Xiu said in a low voice, "It's true. I've used the power of my spirit to sense it, and the fluctuations it emitted are definitely Elder Wei's fluctuations." As he spoke, Chu Xiu was about to make a move to shatter those soul crystals and rescue Wei Shiya. If it had been someone else, Chu Xiu might not have been so impulsive. He would have definitely verified the other party's identity first, and he would only make a move after he was 100% confident. However, the other party was Wei Shiya, and not anyone else. Wei Shiya wasn't Chu Xiu's master, but to Chu Xiu, Elder Wei was the only person who had been good to him without any selfish motives. Elder Wei wasn't his master, but he was like a master and a father to him. Back in the lower realm, no matter how much trouble Chu Xiu caused or how many enemies he provoked, Elder Wei had always been the first to stand behind him and help him. Hence, when he saw Wei Shiya being surrounded by so many demonic ghosts, even Chu Xiu couldn't be 100% sure that the other party was really Elder Wei. He had to make a move. However, at this moment, an old voice suddenly sounded. "Hey, kid, I'd advise you not to make a move. He's currently trapped in the primordial illusion of dozens of demonic ghosts, and his spirit has already fused with the illusion of the demonic ghosts. If you act rashly and destroy these soul crystals and kill the demonic ghosts, the illusion will shatter, and his spirit will dissipate. On the other hand, if he survives, it'll be equivalent to obtaining the pure power of these dozens of demonic ghosts, and his state of mind will reach a higher level. It'll be considered a form of good fortune." When he heard this voice, Lu Jianghe trembled violently, as if he had thought of something. He murmured, "It's him? That's impossible. How can it be him?" Chu Xiu looked up subconsciously. In front of him, there was an old Taoist priest. He was dressed in a luxurious Taoist robe embroidered with cloud patterns, but he was a little slovenly, and his Taoist crown was tied askew. He had a sage-like appearance, but the expression and aura on his face were very strange. Chu Xiu couldn't describe it. If he had to describe it, he would say that it was like he was on the streets of a marketplace, and it was very worldly. It was very down-to-earth, but when placed next to his sage-like appearance, it was extremely awkward. Chu Xiu felt that the other party was very familiar, so familiar that the other party's figure seemed to be imprinted in the bottom of his heart, but he couldn't recall it for a moment. At this moment, Lu Jianghe said in a trembling voice, Ning Xuanji." Chapter 1279. In the pugilistic world, those who stood at the peak of strength would be respected as powerhouses. However, there was another kind of person who, even if he was no longer at the peak for 10 or even 100 or 1,000 years, would still have his story spread in the pugilistic world. That kind of person was called a legend of the pugilistic world. Dugu Weiwei was a legend of the pugilistic world, and so was Ning Xuanji. The person standing in front of Chu Xiu was a living legend of the pugilistic world. The Dao sect's sovereign was respected as an immortal. During the period when Dugu Weiwei dominated the pugilistic world, Ning Xuanji was the only one who had the strength to compete with Dugu Weiwei. Even Chu Xiu couldn't understand it. With the environment of the lower realm back then, it was already strange enough that a Dugu Weiwei was created. How could another Ning Xuanji be created? Chu Xiu didn't suspect that the old Taoist in front of him was fake because Lu Jianghe wouldn't mistake him for someone else. He had been captured alive by Ning Xuanji before. Of course, in his words, he was defeated by Ning Xuanji after a fierce battle. Of course, this wasn't important. Lu Jianghe had such a deep impression of Ning Xuanji that it was impossible for him to mistake him for someone else. However, it happened so suddenly that Chu Xiu's mind went blank at this moment. He stared at Ning Xuanji in a daze. At this time, Ning Xuanji was also sizing up Chu Xiu and Lu Jianghe. He seemed to have thought of something interesting. He looked at Lu Jianghe and said with a chuckle, "I remember now. Aren't you the little pirate under Dugu Weiwei?" I heard that you were imprisoned by Dugu Weiwei because of your cheap mouth. Have you been released now? It's a pity that Dugu Weiwei doesn't know how to use people. You're good at stealing dogs. Every one of them is very fat. Lu Jianghu's face instantly turned red, but in the end he could only say in a slightly wronged manner, I stopped being a pirate a long time ago. I'm the 5th devil lord of the Kunlun devil cult. Ning Xuanji waved his hand disdainfully. Devil sovereign my ass. Dugu Weiwei made something like playing house with a child, but you guys still treat it like a treasure. You must be crazy. As he spoke, Ning Xuanji suddenly turned to look at Chu Xiu. A trace of doubt flashed across his eyes. Why do I find you so familiar? At this moment, Chu Xiu almost broke out in a cold sweat. He could no longer care about Ning Xuanji's repeated, Dao Grandpa, and Bullsh*T, which had ruined his title as an immortal. Lu Jiang he said that his current appearance is exactly the same as Dugu Wei's Earth Soul doppelganger. Previously, Chu Xiu had asked Tian Hun about the soul-splitting technique. After Dugu Weiwei had researched it, he had rarely used it except in front of the people of the Kunlun devil cult. It was not because it was not useful, but because there was no need to use it. At that time, the Kunlun demon sect had already dominated the entire pugilistic world. Even if Dugu Weiwei didn't make a move, the 4 demon lords under him would be able to settle everything. There was no need for them to use the soul-splitting technique. Therefore, there were only a few people in the pugilistic world who could see the appearance of Dugu Weiwei's doppelganger. However, Ning Xuanji was Dugu Weiwei's old enemy. They had fought from the lower realm to the Daluocean. He might have seen the soul-splitting technique. Before Chu Xiu could finish worrying, Ning Xuanji suddenly slapped his head and said, Oh right, I remember now. You're Dugu Weiwei. Before Chu Xiu could say anything, Ning Xuanji suddenly stretched out his hand and grabbed Chu Xiu's figure. It was an irresistible force, because in that instant, Chu Xiu felt that the nomological powers around him had changed. It was as if the world around Chu Xiu had begun to shrink at that moment. It shrank to a foot away from him and was easily grabbed by Ning Xuanji. Chu Xiu had never seen this kind of power before. In his hands, the powerful rule's power seemed to be his own earth qi. He could knead it at will. It could even be said that Ning Xuanji's effortless grab was a divine ability. In the face of such a legendary existence, Chu Xiu had already given up resisting. The so-called resistance was like a mantis trying to stop a chariot. He was overestimating himself. However, Ning Xuanji took a closer look at Chu Xiu and suddenly said, You're not Dugu Weiwei. You're definitely not Dugu Weiwei. But you look exactly like one of Dugu Weiwei's doppelgangers. Or you. Chu Xiu breathed a sigh of relief and said, Actually, I'm Dugu Weiwei's successor. I became like this because I cultivated his cultivation technique. Ning Xuanji suddenly sneered. Do you think I've become senile after staying here for hundreds of years? You're lying. Do you know that under the soul-searching technique, all of your memories will be presented in front of me like a scroll? Even if you peeped at Widow Li next door when you were 5 years old, you can't hide it from me. However, the next moment, Ning Xuanji's expression suddenly changed. He chuckled and said, Of course, the soul-searching technique is an evil secret technique that goes against the heavens. I'm the sect master of the true martial arts sect, the leader of the Dao sects, and the old Immortal who was conferred the title of national preceptor by 3 countries at the same time. How can I know something like the soul-searching technique? However, before Chu Xiu could breathe a sigh of relief, Ning Xuanji touched the messy beard on his chin and said, However, although I don't know it, the principle of this thing seems very simple. It's nothing more than invading the other party's mind with a powerful spirit power, sealing the other party's spirit, and then finding the real spirit. Like pulling silk from a cocoon, you'll take out the memories in the real spirit. Just think about it, what kind of secret technique is this? Chu Xiu felt like cursing at this moment. What immortal Ning Xuanji, he's simply a lunatic. When did I peek at Widow Li taking a bath? In both my previous and current lives, there was no widow next door at all. If he wanted to kill, he would kill. If he wanted to cut, he would cut. The impact on Chu Xiu's state of mind was even stronger than that of the demonic ghost's illusion. In the end, Ning Xuanji did not use the soul-searching technique to check Chu Xiu's spirit. He just threw him back casually and said indifferently, "Forget it, it's a waste of my brain. I won't study it anymore. Although you look the same, you're not Dugu Weiwei. Whether Dugu Weiwei is dead or alive is none of my business now. I haven't solved my own problems yet." Chu Xiu was no longer restrained by the power of rules. He gave Lu Jianghe a questioning look. Is this really Ning Xuanji? He had long known that the real Ning Xuanji might be a little different from the legendary Immortal in Jianghu. However, the Ning Xuanji in front of him seemed to be mentally ill and abnormal. In front of Ning Xuanji, Lu Jianghe did not even dare to send a voice transmission. He could only give him a helpless look. This man was like this 500 years ago. Now, it seemed that he had not changed. However, at this moment, a slap came through the air, directly slapping Lu Jianghe. Ning Xuanji sneered and said, "Little thief, mind your words. If you dare to speak ill of me again, I'll castrate you. Do you believe me?" Lu Jianghe looked aggrieved. "I didn't say a word. I didn't even send a voice transmission." Ning Xuanji snorted coldly, "There's something wrong with your eyes. Don't play tricks with me. No matter what, I've lived for hundreds of years. I can tell from your eyes that you're up to no good." Chu Xiu could not help but cough. If the people of the true martial sect in the lower realm found out about this, some disciples might even pull out their swords and commit suicide on the spot. Those disciples might not be able to stand it. Ning Xuanji, the Immortal, who had been praised for 500 years and made into a legend of the pugilistic world, was actually like this. At this time, Ning Xuanji turned his gaze to Chu Xiu and sneered, "Kid, you must be slandering me in your heart now, right? Don't think that I don't dare to slap you. I couldn't slap that arrogant guy Dugu Weiwei 500 years ago. You look like him. I can slap you to my heart's content." Chu Xiu choked for a moment, but in order to avoid being slapped, he had no choice but to obediently withdraw his gaze and stop thinking about those messy things. At this time, Ning Xuanji suddenly asked, "You and that little thief came to the Daluotian from the lower realm? Since you guys have appeared, does that mean that the Kunlun devil cult has risen again in the lower realm?" At this time, Chu Xiu did not know how to answer. If he told the truth, would Ning Xuanji slap him to death? Ning Xuanji sneered and said, "Don't think so much. If I wanted to kill you, I would have killed you just now. Would I have kept you alive until now? It's not that I and that old guy Dugu Weiwei are irreconcilable. The so-called distinction between righteous and evil is nothing more than a label that someone put on us because Dugu Weiwei was too overbearing. At that time, I was in the true martial sect. The little bastards of the Kunlun devil cult were not blind. Naturally, they would not provoke me. Therefore, the hatred between me and the Kunlun devil cult is not as big as you think. In that case, Senior, why did you fight an intense battle with Dugu Weiwei from the lower realms all the way to the Great Law Heaven? This question was very puzzling to those who knew Ning Xuanji's character. Everyone in the pugilistic world thought that Ning Xuanji took action for the righteous pugilistic world and for the common people. However, in reality, the Kunlun devil cult only wanted to dominate the pugilistic world. They did not want to exterminate the pugilistic world and slaughter the world. With Ning Xuanji's character, he would not shout such righteous slogans to crusade against Dugu Weiwei. Even Lu Jianghe, who was like a mouse that had seen a cat, pricked up his ears, wanting to hear why. Ning Xuanji said calmly, "Why? If you were in the same realm as me and Dugu Weiwei, you wouldn't have asked this question. When Dugu Weiwei and I were in the lower realm, we were already standing at the peak of the 9 heavens of martial immortal and trampled on the 9 heavens. At that time, only he and I had reached this realm. There might be one more, but that doesn't count. It's lonely at the top. Do you think that the peak is the real peak? We all wanted to see if there were other sceneries above the peak. Therefore, that battle was imperative. One person is lonely at the top, but 2 people can break this world. Dugu Weiwei doesn't care about your so-called righteous and evil, the so-called general trend of the pugilistic world. I don't care about it either. What we want to see is the scenery above the peak." Chapter 1280. Ning Xuanji's words were unexpected, but it was also within his expectations. Chu Xiu had always believed in one principle. If one was not in the same realm, one should not speculate about the true thoughts of those in a higher position. Who knew what Ning Xuanji and Dugu Weiwei were thinking 500 years ago? It was just like the so-called immortal title given to Ning Xuanji by those people in the pugilistic world. It was just wishful thinking. Have you ever seen an immortal who likes to eat dog meat all day long? Ning Xuanji waved his hand casually and said, "Let's not talk about those old things. I haven't been back for 500 years. Since you've returned to the lower realm, tell me, what happened to the Kunlun devil cult and the true martial sect? Have they been destroyed?" After knowing Ning Xuanji's thoughts, Chu Xiu did not hide anything. He told the truth. The Kunlun devil cult was destroyed after Dugu Weiwei disappeared. It has only been rebuilt in recent years. I'm the current sect master of the Kunlun devil cult. Ning Xuanji glanced at Chu Xiu and said, "Weak? Too weak. Although you look like a doppelganger of Dugu Weiwei, your current strength can't be compared to Dugu Weiwei at all." Chu Xiu coughed and did not refute. He continued, "As for the true martial sect, it has always been passed down. However, its strength is not considered strong. The current leader of the Dao sects is the Taoist master mansion of Mount Longhu." Ning Xuanji nodded and said expressionlessly, "Oh, I see. It was not destroyed. This is beyond my expectations." Chu Xiu realized that he really could not see through Ning Xuanji. Would normal people want their sect to be destroyed? The true martial sect was not destroyed. Looking at Ning Xuanji's expression, he seemed to be very surprised. Chu Xiu asked in confusion, "Why did the true martial sect have to be destroyed? With your reputation back then, no one dared to destroy the true martial sect." Ning Xuanji sneered and said, "Reputation? It was probably a bad reputation. In the past, I pointed at the abbot of the Great Light Temple and scolded him as a bald donkey. The sect leader of the Chunyang Dao sect wanted to discuss Dao with me and was slapped by me. With that kind of standard, are they worthy of discussing Dao with me? I even roasted dog meat in the Sabodhi monastery and borrowed the famous sword of the Hidden Sword Villa. Although they were a little unwilling, they forced me to borrow it. I've offended so many people, and none of my disappointing juniors can bear the burden. Is it strange that they were killed?" Chu Xiu was a little stunned at this time. If it weren't for the fact that the Kunlun devil cult was too overbearing and played the game of those who submitted to them would prosper and those who opposed them would perish, Ning Xuanji would have been the one besieged by the people of the pugilistic world. At the very least, Chu Xiu knew that even Dugu Weiwei didn't go overboard like this. Killing was just a matter of nodding one's head to the ground. At most, Dugu Weiwei would hold a knife and ask if one was convinced. If one was not convinced, he would use the knife. Unlike Ning Xuanji, he was simply slapping people in the face. Chu Xiu shook his head and said, "Maybe it's because after your battle with Dugu Weiwei, your reputation was too great and your legacy was left to the true martial sect. Therefore, no one dared to touch the true martial sect at this time." Ning Xuanji nodded and said, "Oh, that's good." Chu Xiu looked at Ning Xuanji in surprise. He didn't seem to care much about his own sect. Because Dugu Weiwei's physical body was destroyed, he could only use the soul-splitting technique. One was in the netherworld heaven, one was suppressed, and there was a muddle-headed Chu Xiu. There was no way for him to return to the lower realm to save the Kunlun devil cult. However, Ning Xuanji was alive and well. Why didn't he return to the lower realm? Even if he had a plan in the Daluotian, he should have time to return to the lower realm. As if he could see what Chu Xiu was thinking, Ning Xuanji said lightly, "The Buddhist monks talk about karma, while the Taoists talk about karma. My Taoists pay attention to karma. It's karma to be born in the true martial sect, but it's only for one lifetime. Therefore, I've almost paid back what I should. It's been 500 years. My disciples and granddisciples in the past are all dead. I don't even know those guys now. Other than calling me patriarch, what do they have to do with me? One life of karma, one life. What does the next life have to do with me?" Ning Xuanji was indeed the supreme figure of the Dao sect. Although what he said was a little vulgar, it was still very reasonable. At this time, Chu Xiu suddenly asked, "Senior Ning, I have some doubts. I wonder if you can answer them?" Ning Xuanji took a deep look at Chu Xiu and said, "You're really not Duge Weiwei. Your character is completely different from him." Just as Chu Xiu wanted to ask what was different, Ning Xuanji asked, "Do you have wine? Do you have meat?" Chu Xiu was stunned. Why would he bring that kind of thing into the central province? When one reached the martial immortal realm, they wouldn't starve to death just by absorbing the spiritual energy of the world. They could completely abstain from eating. Although Chu Xiu wasn't an official martial immortal yet, he could achieve that with his strength. At this moment, Jianghu came over and took out a few jars of wine, roasted chicken and roasted duck. Chu Xiu looked at Jianghu with a strange expression. Why did he bring these things with him? Did he come to a place like the central province for a picnic? Ning Xuanji rolled up his sleeves, picked up the jar of wine and took a big gulp. As he chewed on the drumstick, he sighed and said, "I haven't drunk or eaten meat for more than 100 years. I've almost forgotten what it tastes like. The Daluotian people are too boring. Their minds are filled with cultivation." Chu Xiu thought to himself, "That's normal. Their minds are filled with food. That's abnormal. Alright, if you have anything to ask, just ask. Just treat it as the wine money." Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, "Back then, you came to the Daluotian with Duge Weiwei. Why are you here now?" Ning Xuanji said calmly, "It's simple. For the sake of breaking through and to repay a karma. Back then, I broke through the world barrier with Duge Weiwei and came to the Daluotian. Since ancient times, only Duge Weiwei and I have broken through the world barrier in this way. Back then, although the battle between Duge Weiwei and I was intense, we didn't surpass our peak state. However, when we broke through the world barrier, we had a different epiphany." Ning Xuanji pointed at the threads formed by the power of law around him. The world is formed by the power of law. The countless laws may seem chaotic, but they are orderly and regular. If I can comprehend all these laws and arrange them in order, will I be able to create a world as well? The cycle of life and death, creation and destruction. Everything in the world is a cycle of reincarnation. Will the pinnacle be the creation of the world? If someone else said this, they would definitely be regarded as a madman. But it was Ning Xuanji who said this. Who would think that Ning Xuanji was a madman? Although Chu Xiu was also shocked by what he heard, he wasn't at Ning Xuanji's level. Naturally, he couldn't understand Ning Xuanji's feelings. The Daluotian Divine Palace connects the two worlds. It's the most direct manifestation of the power of law. So, I've been guarding this place all these years, observing the power of law. At the same time, I've made an agreement with the experts of the top Daluotian sections. I'll help them guard these demonic ghosts, but at the same time, no one is allowed to disturb me here. I'll take this place for myself. Of course, this is only one of the reasons. The other reason is that the outbreak of demonic ghosts in the central province has something to do with me and Duge Weiwei. If Duge Weiwei and I hadn't shattered the space and connected the two worlds, making the laws between the two worlds a little more chaotic, the outbreak of demonic ghosts in the central province wouldn't have been so violent. So now that Duge Weiwei has been suppressed, I'm the only one who can repay this karma." At this point, Ning Xuanji suddenly snorted and said, "Duge Weiwei is too straightforward. His brain is almost filled with astral energy. No, he doesn't use his brain at all. When I broke the world barrier, what I comprehended was to control the laws and create a world to transcend. But what Duge Weiwei comprehended was to use absolute power to cut through the shackles of the world's laws and reach the realm of transcendence. So, when that guy came to the Daluotian, he looked indignant. After we fought in the end, he went against the Daluotian sects and killed them even faster than in the lower realms. But in the end he was slapped in the face and suppressed. That guy really thinks the Daluotian are made of mud. They came to the Daluotian from the lower realms with tens of thousands of years of heritage." Ning Xuanji glanced at Chu Xiu. "That's why I said you're not Duge Weiwei. You don't look like Duge Weiwei at all. Duge Weiwei doesn't use any tricks or schemes. It's not that he can't use them, but that he doesn't want to use them. But you, kid, have a lot of thoughts. Of course, this isn't a bad thing. If Duge Weiwei had as many thoughts as you 500 years ago, he wouldn't have been suppressed. Of course, in other words, If Dugu Weiwei had as many thoughts as you do, he wouldn't be Dugu Weiwei. After hearing Ning Xuanji's words, a thoughtful look appeared in Chu Xiu's eyes. Dugu Weiwei's original idea was to break free from the shackles of the world's laws with absolute power and reach the realm of transcendence. But when did he change his goal to find the longevity heaven? After being stunned for a moment, Chu Xiu put away the messy thoughts in his mind. He pointed at Wei Shuya and asked, "Senior, why is old Wei here?" Ning Xuanji said a little awkwardly, "Ahem, you're talking about this kid. I made a mistake when I was calming the distorted laws here. Don't worry, with me guarding here, even if he doesn't get any opportunities, he won't die. You've seen what these demons and ghosts look like. They're evolving more and more. If I don't take care of them, I'm afraid they'll become real creatures. So I had to do something big. I directly returned their lair to its original state and created a normal space in the central province. Maybe I was a little too powerful, so I pulled this kid in from the outside world." Given Ning Xuanji's age, it wasn't wrong for him to call Wei Shuya kid. After all, Wei Shuya had lived for 500 to 600 years. Hearing that Wei Shuya was safe, Chu Xiu didn't have to worry anymore. Chapter 1281. Although it was an accident that Wei Shuya was trapped here, it was also a stroke of fortune. Ning Xuanji's words could not be wrong. There was no need for him to deceive Chu Xiu and the others. Looking at Chu Xiu and Lu Jianghe, Ning Xuanji asked, "Since the two of you are here, does that mean that the exalted divine palace has opened again?" Chu Xiu nodded. Ning Xuanji sneered disdainfully, "Those guys are too calculative. It seems like they still don't believe me. Do they think that I can't suppress these things? They actually sent people here to die." Chu Xiu looked at the demonic ghosts that were being returned to their original form by the storm of laws and asked in confusion, "The exalted divine palace has so many experts, and even Senior Ning is here. Are they still unable to completely exterminate these demonic ghosts?" Ning Xuanji shook his head and said, "They can be exterminated, but there is no need to do so. In this world with distorted laws, the demonic ghosts are immortal. It might seem like you killed them and obtained the soul crystals, but in reality, the soul crystals are only the energy they have gathered. Their true spirits will never be destroyed in this distorted world. Killing them is useless. Unless the exalted divine palace is destroyed and the two worlds return to normal, the demonic ghosts will never be exterminated. As for the Daluotian, they will not face the demonic ghosts unless they have no other choice. But because they owe the demonic ghosts karma." Ning Xuanji looked up at the demonic ghosts and sneered, "The first generation of demonic ghosts is also the strongest generation. How did they come into being? They were the victims who had fallen in the spatial storms between the two realms when they transmigrated. It was the ancestors of those people who had abandoned them. Some of them were even the ancestors of their sections. When these demonic ghosts were facing me, it was naturally impossible for them to attack my mental state. But what if it was someone else? Even those ninth heaven's martial immortals dare to say that they don't have any loopholes in their hearts? Furthermore, the existence of the middle province was also beneficial to them. The great heavenly divine palace only opened once every several decades. Although a lot of people would die, it would also be able to steadily produce several martial immortals. If it were any other place, who could be certain that they would be able to take that step? Chu Xiu nodded. That was true. Even sects like the Sanskrit school or the Heavenly Net Treasure Temple, which had dozens of profound understanding of heaven and earth cultivators, how many half-step martial immortals did they have? Moreover, half a step was only half a step. Whether he could take the final step in this lifetime was also unknown. However, these demonic ghosts are quite interesting. In the past few years, I've also captured a few demonic ghosts to study them. They are neither human nor ghost. In the beginning, they could only rely on the power of the rules within the central planes to survive. They only exist on instinct and have no physical bodies. But later on, they used the power of the natural order to construct the city of the wronged. They gradually gained physical bodies, spiritual intelligence, and could think. They were no different from normal living beings. It's just that they can't remember their memories from when they were alive. but their physical bodies are the true spirits of those cultivators who didn't dissipate. So, are they resurrected or truly new existences? Interesting. Hearing Ning Xuanji's words, Chu Xiu felt as if he had been struck by lightning. He suddenly thought of something. He was formed from the earth soul of Dugu Weiwei and was once a part of Dugu Weiwei. But now, he had his own spiritual intelligence and became Chu Xiu. Why did this situation resemble the demonic ghosts so much? They used to be incomplete existences, but after an unknown amount of time, they gained their own spiritual intelligence. So, was the evidence of a person's true existence the source of their existence or their memories? There was no correct answer to this question. But it was obvious that Chu Xiu believed that he was Chu Xiu. This answer was the most correct one. Lu Jiang he gently poked Chu Xiu from behind, indicating that he should stop talking nonsense and leave quickly. They felt a little awkward staying with the old Taoist, Ning Xuanji. Of course, he wouldn't admit that he was scared to death of the old Taoist. Seeing Lu Jianghe's little action, Ning Xuanji said indifferently, "Don't worry, I don't eat people. No matter what, we're old friends. I'll send you off. Now that Dugu Weiwei has been suppressed, even if I detain you, no one will come to ransom you." With that, Ning Xuanji stretched out his hand and waved. A pitch-black door appeared in front of him. "Go out and you'll see the Daluo Divine Palace." Chu Xiu bowed to Ning Xuanji and said, "Thank you, senior." Lu Jiang he also hurriedly cupped his fists and followed Chu Xiu into the door. However, after Chu Xiu and Lu Jiang he left, Ning Xuanji frowned. "Dugu Weiwei, what the hell are you doing?" He was certain that Chu Xiu was not Dugu Weiwei. His aura and soul were different. He was certain of this. In terms of understanding of Dugu Weiwei, in the lower realm and the Daluotian, apart from Dugu Weiwei himself, only his opponent, Ning Xuanji, knew him the best. If Dugu Weiwei suddenly broke free from High Heaven sect one day and then caused trouble in the Daluotian world, Ning Xuanji wouldn't be surprised. What Ning Xuanji found strange was that Dugu Weiwei actually got a guy from the lower realm who looked exactly like his clone, but he didn't have Dugu Weiwei's aura. Why was that? Forget it, I've already taken a different path anyway. What does this Dao Master have to do with me? Let's deal with these things first. Ning Xuanji raised his head and took a big gulp of wine. With a wave of his hand, the storm in the entire city of the wronged suddenly intensified and began to stir wildly. After Chu Xiu and Lu Jiang he stepped out of the door, they appeared in a wasteland filled with yellow sand. But this area was different from the distorted laws in the central continent. The laws here were exactly the same as the outside world. In the middle of this wasteland, a huge glazed palace sat in the center. The entire palace was thousands of meters in size and was extremely majestic, but there were no doors or windows. It was as if the outside world was a single entity, covered in a dazzling golden glazed luster. But upon closer inspection, the so-called glazed luster turned out to be array Dao runes shining brightly. This was the Daluotian Divine Palace, which was built by gathering the strongest forces in the lower realm. Lu Jiang he didn't observe the Daluotian Divine Palace at this time. He just breathed a sigh of relief and said, "Finally, we're far away from that old Taoist priest." Who would have thought that after 500 years, that old Taoist priest is still alive? Chu Xiu was surprised and asked, "Ning Xuanji didn't do anything to you back then, so why are you so afraid of him?" Lu Jiang he coldly snorted and said, "Didn't he do anything to me? He almost played me to death. That old Taoist priest is simply a psychopath. You can never guess what he wants to do. The most important thing is that his strength is too strong. He can simply do whatever he wants without the slightest scruple. I even dare to say that if Sect Master swapped places with this old Taoist priest, he would attract even more hatred than Sect Master." Chu Xiu pointed behind him and said, "Be careful with your words. That person is an existence above the 9th firmament of martial immortal. You haven't even touched the shadow of a martial immortal, and he's already preparing to create his own world. What you say now, Senior Ning Xuanji might even be able to hear it." Hearing Chu Xiu say so, Lu Jiang he immediately shrunk his neck, not daring to say any more nonsense. At present, Only Chu Xiu and Lu Jianghu had Ning Xuanji open a backdoor for them, so they came to the Daluotian Divine Palace ahead of time. The others should still be wandering around in the city of the wronged. But it was useless even if they came ahead of time. The Daluotian Divine Palace was controlled by formations and wouldn't open until the time was right. Therefore, Chu Xiu closed his eyes and rested in front of the Daluotian Divine Palace with Lu Jianghu. At the same time, he was also digesting all the information he had obtained from Ning Xuanji. Chu Xiu already knew the whole story of the battle 500 years ago. It was complicated in the minds of later generations, but in fact, the cause and effect were extremely simple. It was nothing more than two guys who stood at the peak preparing to fight to see if they could reach the peak. However, ever since they arrived in exalted heaven, the two of them had been separated, and the period of time between them had been a little confusing. Tianhun told himself that Dugu Weiwei was going to hide in the Yellow Springs heaven and seize the three demonic Dao origins to open the longevity heaven and reach transcendence. And now Ning Xuanji said that Dugu Weiwei was clearly going to prove his Dao with strength, break through the shackles of this world, and reach transcendence. In such a short period of time, how did Dugu Weiwei suddenly change his way of thinking? Moreover, the Daluotian's foundation seemed to be stronger than Chu Xiu had imagined, because Ning Xuanji said that he was now working with the Daluotian continent. With Ning Xuanji's character and strength, if he could completely crush all the Daluotian sects, would there still be a need for cooperation? They would all scram to the side. He would monopolize the central province and slowly study it. But now, Ning Xuanji chose to cooperate with the Daluotian sections. Obviously, a single sect might not be able to defeat Ning Xuanji, a supreme expert who already stood above the ninth heaven, but if they joined forces, they could make Ning Xuanji treat them with caution. After all, 500 years ago, Dugu Weiwei had single-handedly fought against an entire world. Even though he had caused rivers of blood to flow and turned the entire great overarching celestial capital upside down, he had still failed. All kinds of information kept echoing in Chu Xiu's mind. It was simply a mess. It was like this every time. Every time he thought he knew the truth of that year, a clue suddenly appeared, messing up his thoughts and making the truth even more confusing. Just after Chu Xiu and the others waited here for a few days, someone finally came out of the city of the Vein. They were Su Guishan and Fang Yizhen from the Three Pure Temple. When the two saw Chu Xiu and Lu Jianghu waiting there, a look of surprise appeared in their eyes. The strength of these two was actually so terrifying. They cut through all the obstacles and killed the demons and ghosts along the way. They even came earlier than them. Chapter 1282. Although Su Guishan and Fang Yizhen were surprised that Chu Xiu had arrived so early, Fang Yizhen still took the initiative to greet Chu Xiu. I didn't expect Brother Chu to be the first to come out of that damned place. You two aren't slow either. We found a shortcut to get out. Chu Xiu looked at Fang Yizhen and said, Brother Fang, it seems you already have a card up your sleeve. The Three Pure Temple is probably one of the few sects in recent years to have two disciples enter the exalted divine palace. Fang Yizhen chuckled. It's all thanks to you, Brother Chu. Oh? Why is that? Because your robbery there gave me inspiration. After entering the Central Plains, I also chose a place to rob, and I also accumulated quite a few tokens. Chu Xiu looked at Fang Yizhen with some surprise. This was an outstanding disciple of the Three Pure Temple, but he was copying him in robbing others. This was a bit too damaging to his image. Most importantly, Chu Xiu's robbery had spread to the entire Middle State. Those martial artists hated him to the core and took advantage of the fact that the Brahmin sect had made a move against him. However, no one said anything about Fang Yizhen. It could only be said that the Three Pure Temple was too strong, so strong that even if those cultivators were robbed, they could only suffer in silence. After exchanging a few words of greeting, Fang Yizhen sat down next to Su Guishan. However, Su Guishan sat cross-legged on the ground with his eyes closed, while Fang Yizhen took out a pig trotter the size of his face and gnawed on it. It was very inconsistent with his demeanor as a Taoist master. Although the two outstanding disciples of the younger generation of the Three Pristines Palace were both extraordinary, their temperaments were worlds apart. Su Guishan was a man of few words and had a calm personality. Fang Yizhen, on the other hand, had a lively personality and a strong sense of worldly affairs. Of course, no matter which one it was, neither of them were ordinary people. The group waited for 4 or 5 days before another dozen or so people came out of the city of the tragic death. Some people appeared very calm, such as Yi Guixia, Ouyang Xing, and the others. However, there were also a few heaven and earth mystic insight realm martial artists who appeared to be in a sorry state. It was obvious that they were chased out by a group of demonic ghosts. Before the great heavenly divine palace, the profound understanding realm cultivators had already been eliminated. Those that were qualified to fight for the final ranking would, at the very least, be half-step martial immortals. Everyone looked around. In fact, they had more or less figured out who the final winner would be. The 3 Pure Palace occupied 2 spots, so Su Guishan and Fang Yizhen would definitely advance. Next was the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple's Fa Jing. All the tokens and soul crystals collected by all the cultivators in the Heavenly Treasure Temple were in Fa Jing's hands. In addition, half of the tokens and soul crystals collected by the Brahma sect were also in his hands. Therefore, Fa Jing's wealth was probably more than Su Guishan and Fang Yizhen's, and he might even be ranked first. Apart from the 3 of them, Yi Guixia from the World Sword sect would definitely be able to advance. This time, there were quite a number of people from the Sword sect under the heavens. Among them, Yanji involuntarily gave up the fight for the ranking and gave his token and soul crystal to Yi Guixia, so Yi Guixia would definitely have a place. Then there was Chu Xiu. Although Chu Xiu had few subordinates, they were not weak. Moreover, everyone knew that he had robbed a group of cultivators and then joined forces with the Heavenly Treasure Temple to kick the Brahma sect out of the competition, obtaining half of the Brahma sect's soul crystals and tokens. In this way, Chu Xiu might have accumulated more than Yi Guixia and would definitely be able to advance. Therefore, there was basically no suspense in the competition for the Great Heavenly Divine Palace this time. The top 5 had already been decided, and only the last spot was still up for debate. There were also many who were qualified to compete for the last spot. Among them, Zhuo Bufan from the Martial God sect was qualified. He was a half-step martial immortal and had fought quite a few people from the Martial God sect. There was also Ouyang Xing from Heavenly Sovereign Yuan Yang's lineage. He was only a step away from the martial immortal realm and was even stronger than Zhuo Bufan. Moreover, although he was alone, Su Jiang, Chen Jiolong, and the other primeval sovereign successors who had entered this place before had all given their soul crystals to Ouyang Xing, knowing that they weren't qualified to make it to the end. There were also several cultivators in black. They were from the mysterious heaven realm of the northern region and were also from a large Dao sect, but they took a different route from the orthodox Dao sections. However, under the powerful influence of the 3 Pure Temple, the mysterious heaven realm was still able to make a name for itself in the northern region. Although they had kept a low profile after entering the Central Plains, they were still qualified to compete for the ranking. In the crowd, Zhuo Bufan frowned and looked around. Among the people present, he was the most nervous. Everyone else had victory in their grasp, but he couldn't afford to lose. The mysterious heaven realm had always kept a low profile, and the level of their disciples was also very average. They hadn't lost a single disciple in coming to the Central Plains this time, so it wasn't a big deal even if they couldn't enter the Great Heavenly Divine Palace competition. Ouyang Xing was only one step away from becoming a martial immortal, so whether he entered the Great Heavenly Divine Palace or not, he was bound to become a martial immortal. The only difference was that he could save some time after entering the Great Heavenly Divine Palace. Zhuo Bufan was the only exception. He had only just become a half-step martial immortal. Furthermore, he had gathered the entire War Martial God sect to help him collect the title plates. If he were to fail, the War Martial God sect would suffer the greatest loss. Therefore, Zhuo Bufan looked around and suddenly transmitted his voice to Ouyang Xing. "Brother Ouyang, what do you think about attacking Chu Xiu and snatching his tokens and soul crystals?" Among the people present, the only one Zhuo Bufan could offend was Chu Xiu. He didn't dare to touch the 3 Pristine Palace or the Heavenly Treasure Temple, nor did he dare to offend the person behind Ouyang Xing. There were many people in the mysterious heaven realm, but only Chu Xiu was alone. Although Lu Jianghe was also here, it was clear that in Zhuo Bufan's eyes, Lu Jianghe was not a person. Moreover, there would always be a battle between the eastern region and the southern region. Therefore, he didn't need to consider the consequences of attacking Chu Xiu. Ouyang Xing said indifferently, "Why should I attack? I have accumulated enough soul crystals and tokens, so why should I attack now? Zhuo Bufan, you want to pull me out just because you don't have enough? Do you think I, Ouyang Xing, am an idiot? Also, you have seen Chu Xiu's strength. He shattered a martial immortal's body with one strike and destroyed a martial immortal's primordial spirit with one strike. With such strength, do you still have the courage to cause trouble for him?" Zhuo Bufan shook his head and said, "Of course Brother Ouyang is not an idiot. I do want Chu Xiu's token, but defeating Chu Xiu is not a bad thing for you, Brother Ouyang. Previously, when you struck Chu Xiu while he was down, you had already offended him to the extreme. Perhaps you didn't understand Chu Xiu before coming to the central province. He is a schemer, ruthless, and vengeful person. Back then, when the people from the Bliss Demon Palace wanted to kill him, he actually joined forces with the Heavenly Demon Palace to stir up a storm in the southern region and destroy the Bliss Demon Palace in advance. Although your Heavenly Exalted Prime Yang's lineage is powerful, it is still best to deal with an enemy like him in advance. If Chu Xiu enters the Daluo Divine Palace and becomes a martial immortal, I'm afraid there will be no end of trouble for you, Brother Ouyang. Furthermore, Chu Xiu isn't as powerful as you think, Brother Ouyang. The other party is also a half-step martial immortal, but he was only able to kill Xan Jialua because he relied on a secret joint attack technique executed by the people around him. Now that he only has one guy with him who isn't that strong, how can he still use that technique? Ouyang Xing frowned slightly but didn't say anything. Zhuo Bufan continued, "Moreover, I have another piece of news. Su Jiang and Chen Jiolong died at the hands of Chu Xiu." "What? Who did you hear this from? Is that true?" Ouyang Xing's expression changed slightly. Although he wasn't that close with these two, they had known each other for a long time. Moreover, the elders of the sect had also interacted with them. Zhuo Bufan said, "Two cultivators saw it with their own eyes. As far as I know, the descendants of the prime sovereigns all have a single descendant, so they must have all kinds of secret techniques on them. You wouldn't have been killed without even knowing who the killer was, would you? I can't possibly deceive you about this, Brother Ouyang. When we leave the Daluotian continent, you can ask the prime sovereigns behind those two and you'll know." Before Ouyang Xing could recover from the shock of this news, Chu Xiu suddenly stepped forward and walked toward Zhuo Bufan. "Zhuo Bufan, I didn't come looking for trouble with you, but you came looking for trouble with me. It seems that you really don't want to enter the exalted divine palace this time." Chu Xiu sneered and the aura around him burst forth. Zhuo Bufan's expression changed drastically. "Chu Xiu, don't you slander me. I'm just discussing the exalted divine palace with Brother Ouyang. What right do you have to say that I'm looking for trouble with you? What proof do you have?" Voice transmissions between cultivators of the same level could absolutely not be heard by others. Even a first heaven martial immortal wouldn't be able to detect it. That was why when others saw the exchange between Zhuo Bufan and Ouyang Xing just now, although they knew that they were transmitting their voices, no one knew what they were talking about. In fact, Chu Xiu didn't know what Zhuo Bufan had said to Ouyang Xing. But ever since he refined the demonic ghost's soul crystal and put on the 6 paths of reincarnation bracelet, Chu Xiu's senses had become extremely sharp. From the way Zhuo Bufan looked at him, Chu Xiu sensed malice. Since it was malice, why should he care what the other party said? "Slander me? What proof do you have?" Chu Xiu sneered. "I don't need proof when I do things. Besides, I don't like you right now and want to kick you out. Is this reason enough?" As soon as Chu Xiu's voice fell, he had already swung his saber. The invisible saber momentum instantly enveloped Zhuo Bufan. Ouyang Xing, who was next to him, moved and turned into a golden ray, instantly dodging to the side. His chances of entering the exalted divine palace were almost 90%, so he didn't want to cause trouble at the moment. And even if Su Jiang and Chen Jiolong really died at the hands of Chu Xiu, it had nothing to do with him. While they were alive, he could still help them by relying on their friendship. But now that they were dead, Ouyangsheng had no interest in avenging the two dead people. Chapter 1283. Although Zhuo Bufan dared to find trouble with Chu Xiu and claimed that without Shang Tianliang and the others, Chu Xiu would not be able to use that slash. In fact, he knew that he was no match for Chu Xiu. Although the last time was the first time Zhuo Bufan met Chu Xiu, he had already sent people to investigate Chu Xiu. Ever since Chu Xiu joined forces with the Sky Devil Palace to destroy the Blissful Demon Palace, these large sects in the southern region had all investigated Chu Xiu. According to the people from the small sects who had participated in that battle, Chu Xiu had once destroyed Yan Beifeng's physical body with such a shocking slash. This proved that even without the help of Shang Tianliang and the others, Chu Xiu was still able to use that shocking and powerful magic power. It was just that the price would be higher. Therefore, he had said those things to Ouyangsheng just now because he wanted to find a powerful and reliable helper. In the end, he did not find a helper, but instead provoked a malefic star. The invisible sharpness of the misty slash made Zhuo Bufan's hair stand on end, but he could not find where the slash was coming from. In the next moment, Zhuo Bufan shouted angrily, and the runes on the bronze armor on his body shone. He made a seal with his hands, and a misty light of chaos radiated from his body. With a loud bang, Zhuo Bufan was blasted back a few steps. The runes on his armor also dimmed a little, but he had successfully blocked the slash. But before Zhuo Bufan could start to fight back, countless invisible blades fell one after another. The breaking formation in Chu Xiu's hand danced wildly, and the blade light was like a storm, completely enveloping Zhuo Bufan. Clanging sounds of explosions rang out. Zhuo Bufan fell into the endless sharp light. He relied on the ancient armor on his body that could withstand divine weapons and the secret method to defend himself, but he fell into a passive situation where he could only take a beating. His Battle God Sect's cultivation technique had never been known for its defense. Instead, it specialized in close combat. If he were to fall into a passive situation like this, he could easily end up like Xian Jialua. He might not even be able to make a single move before he was instantly killed by his opponent. Therefore, at this moment, Zhuo Bufan's whole body was shrouded in the light of blood and qi. His body swelled, and a devil god's Dharma Laksana appeared behind him, roaring between heaven and earth. He was like those powerful devil gods who walked in the vast wilderness in ancient times, chasing after the sun and the moon. He was not afraid of any power as he charged toward Chu Xiu's knife light. When the misty slash's power landed on the demon god Dharma idol, it immediately sliced off a portion of it. However, Zhuo Bufan did not seem to be afraid of death. He used the power of the Dharma power to resist Chu Xiu's knife light. When the power of the Dharma power was completely exhausted, he smashed his fist down. His qi and blood burst out, stirring up the surrounding space and making an explosive sound. One punch shattered the sky. The warriors of the martial arts god sect could only use their strongest combat power when they were in close combat. They could directly use powerful close combat methods to make the opponent completely fall into their own rhythm. However, what met Zhuo Bufan's punch was still a knife. The heaven-swallowing knife. As the saber slashed down, the entire space shook soundlessly. The sky and earth fell, and the extreme power brought about a huge black hole that swallowed everything. It was as if the end of the world had come. This knife cut through the rules. 7 limits. Su Greishan, who had been resting with his eyes closed and had not even opened his eyes when Chu Xiu and Zhuo Bufan fought, suddenly spat out these 3 words. For the Daluotian warriors, the 7 limits were no strangers. However, they did not expect that someone would actually be willing to cultivate such an ominous knife technique. Moreover, what Chu Xiu had obtained was the strongest of the 7 limits, heaven swallowing. It was known as the heaven swallowing, the only martial arts technique that was close to the power of a magical power. In fact, the power of heaven swallowing was not only close to that of a magical power, but also stronger than some of the weaker magical powers. In essence, a magical power was the power to control the rules. Since it was a rule, there were strong and weak ones. The strength of the devourer lay in its absolute power to sever the rules. Therefore, if a weaker mystique were to collide with the devourer's blade, it was still unknown whether it would be able to defeat the devourer. The moment the heaven-swallowing knife slashed down, Zhuobufan's expression suddenly changed. That extreme power, the powerful might that could sever the laws, all told him one thing. This blade could not be blocked. In an instant, Zhuobufan gritted his teeth and made up his mind. Qi and blood filled his body, but the qi and blood were not used to burn. Instead, they combined with his own power and frantically absorbed the power around him. In an instant, a huge shadow of the upper half of his body condensed around him. The huge shadow was like an ancient demon god. It only had the upper half of its body, but it had 4 arms and 2 horns on its head. As it descended, a powerful force seeped into the earth. It was actually a magical power. The 4 arms of the demonic god body did not block Chu Xiu's saber. Instead, they sank into the ground beneath his feet and forcefully uprooted a large portion of the ground beneath his feet. Like a small mountain, they stood in front of him as a shield. Fang Yizhen raised her eyebrows and said softly, "It's the war god sect's magical power, Mountain Shifter. This Zhuobufan is really creative. There is no mountain on the ground, but he actually moved a mountain from the ground. I heard that this Mountain Shifter magical power is not perfect. If it was perfect, it could condense a perfect demon god body. At that time, it would not be Mountain Shifter, but Moon Plucking." Su Guishan said lightly, "Whether it is Mountain Shifter or Moon Plucking, Zhuobufan has lost. All of the martial god sect's secret arts and abilities were offensive in nature, which were extremely ferocious and violent. The magical power affects the rules, so it can also be affected by one's state of mind. Fighting against the heavens and the earth, fighting against the vast wilderness, singing in rage and endless blood. Only by fighting the martial god sect's cultivators with such unparalleled fighting spirit and fighting to the death could the martial god sect's secret arts and magical powers be exerted to the fullest. But unfortunately, since the war god sect became a big sect in the southern region, its strength has become stronger, but there are fewer and fewer martial artists with such a state of mind. When facing Chu Xiu, Zhuobufan actually retreated again and again. He did not even have the intention to fight to the death with him. He even used Mountain Shifter to defend himself. He had already lost. In other words, since Zhuobufan played with his little tricks and wanted to plot against Chu Xiu, he had already lost. This is not the style of the war god sect. Instead of scheming, it is better to talk with your fists. This is the style of the war god sect. Unfortunately, the war god sect has long changed. Fang Yizhen smiled and said, "People change. By the way, I met a guy called Qingdi before. That guy's fists are really hard. Fortunately, I ran fast, otherwise I would have been robbed by him." Senior brother, I felt the true meaning of the war god sect from Qingdi. He is more like a warrior of the war god sect than Zhuobufan. Su Guishan glanced at him and said, "So are you showing off how fast you can run? As a disciple of the 3 Pure Palace, is it glorious to run fast?" Fang Yizhen silently swallowed a mouthful of meat. He found that talking to Su Guishan was really frustrating. At this time, in the field, Zhuobufan used all his strength and used the mountain shifting technique to block Chu Xiu's heaven-devouring saber. However, under Chu Xiu's saber, the mountains and rivers shattered, and the world collapsed. The demon god phantom completely collapsed, and Zhuobufan spat out a mouthful of blood and was sent flying. Chu Xiu moved, and a strong killing intent appeared in his eyes. His figure continued to chase after Zhuobufan. The hearts of everyone present instantly trembled. Chu Xiu had really aroused his killing intent. In fact, in the central province, the competition was indeed fierce at the beginning, but in the end, the strength of everyone was almost the same. Except for people like the Brahma sect and the heavenly Luo temple, who had an irreconcilable hatred, the others would usually leave their opponents a way out after defeating them. They would only take soul crystals and tokens, and the other party would be tactfully eliminated. Now, Chu Xiu did not lack tokens and soul crystals. What he lacked was Zhuobufan's life. As a great sect in the southern region, The war god sect would have to fight with the eastern region sooner or later. Moreover, Zhuo Bufan had hit him when he was down last time, and today he had been seriously injured by him. They had already formed an irreconcilable enmity, so why would he leave him a way out? Chu Xiu did not intend to leave Zhuo Bufan any chance of survival. Fa Jing, who was watching the battle, frowned. He was now certain that this Chu Xiu was definitely not easy to deal with. He was ruthless to the warriors of the Brahma sect. The monks of the heavenly Luo temple felt that it was normal, but he was even more ruthless to the others. At this time, Zhuo Bufan saw that Chu Xiu was charging at him again. In shock, he took advantage of the momentum of being sent flying by the saber to release his qi and blood. He sped up and rushed toward the city of the vein behind him. The speed of a warrior with a strong body like Zhuo Bufan's was extremely amazing when he burned his qi and blood. The key was that this place was too close to the city of the vein. If Chu Xiu chased after him, it would be easy for him to enter the city of the vein again. Therefore, the next moment Chu Xiu stopped, but he raised his right hand and shook it. The 6 paths of reincarnation bracelet burst out with a golden primordial spirit light. It constantly rotated and pulled Zhuo Bufan's primordial spirit. The force immediately made Zhuo Bufan let out a painful groan. He felt that his primordial spirit was about to be pulled out. He had seen the power of the 6 paths of reincarnation bracelet in the last battle with the Brahma sect. Even Xen Jialua, who could transform his primordial spirit, was completely strangled by the 6 paths of reincarnation bracelet, let alone a warrior like him who specialized in physical cultivation. At this moment of life and death, Zhuo Bufan burst out with courage and decisively burned a part of his primordial spirit that was being pulled by Chu Xiu, tearing it apart from his main primordial spirit. That part of his primordial spirit was sucked in by the 6 paths of reincarnation bracelet and strangled, while his figure directly escaped into the fog and entered the city of the vein. Chu Xiu frowned and did not continue to chase after him. The Daluo Divine Palace was about to open, and he did not have time to enter the city of the vein to play hide-and-seek with Zhuo Bufan. Others had killed their way out, but Chu Xiu and Lu Jiang he had been helped out by Ning Xuanji. Therefore, it was really easy to get lost when entering again. Chapter 1284. Zhuo Bufan fled into the city of the wronged. Chu Xiu did not chase after him, letting him fend for himself. At present, Zhuo Bufan was seriously injured. His physical body must have suffered a backlash from using a divine ability. He had also burned his primordial spirit. He was already a spent force. Although the powerful ghosts in the city of the wronged were all suppressed by Ning Xuanji, the ghost squads patrolling the streets were not easy to deal with. Whether or not Zhuo Bufan could walk out of the city of the wronged was still unknown. Chu Xiu walked back and sat down cross-legged with his eyes closed. This time, no one said anything. The entire place was silent. In just a few moves, Chu Xiu had crushed a half-step martial immortal. In their eyes, Chu Xiu's strength was terrifyingly powerful. Moreover, it was not only Chu Xiu. None of the others who were qualified to participate in the final ranking of the Exalted Divine Palace were easy to deal with. The ranking of the Exalted Divine Palace this time might be the strongest in history. Even if it was not the strongest, it was still one of the strongest. The others had long since given up thinking about it. They would just wait for the opening of the Exalted Divine Palace. After another day, the Exalted Divine Palace shone with dazzling light. The Exalted Divine Palace, which originally did not have a door, opened with the power of the formation. At the same time, an aged voice rang out, "The Exalted Divine Palace has opened. Enter the door and place in your token and soul crystals. The first 6 will be able to enter the Exalted Divine Palace." This voice belonged to the Tao ancestor. Most of the formations in the Exalted Divine Palace came from the 3 Pure Temple. Thus, the Tao ancestor could control the Exalted Divine Palace from the outside. Everyone present looked at each other. Then Chu Xiu and the others entered and placed their tokens and soul crystals into the door. However, Chu Xiu only placed in ordinary soul crystals. He had kept the special soul crystals he obtained in the city of the wronged. These ordinary soul crystals and tokens were enough for him to advance. Aside from Chu Xiu and the others, a black-clothed cultivator also threw his soul crystal and token into the mysterious heaven mirror. However, after a while, Chu Xiu and the others all released a ray of light that enveloped them. Only the mysterious heaven realm cultivator didn't. Instead, he was ejected from the portal. The mysterious heaven realm cultivator only shook his head gently and didn't show any frustration. He had never expected to be able to enter the exalted divine palace from the start. As soon as Chu Xiu's group of 6 entered the exalted divine palace, it was as if they had appeared in a bizarre world. The surrounding was filled with the endless power of the rules, but it was imprisoned in a space by the array. Everyone could see it, but they couldn't touch it. There were no decorations in the exalted divine palace, only 10 giant formations. How big was that formation? It reached all the way to the top of the exalted divine palace. Just one formation was several thousand feet long, and it was densely packed with runes that dazzled the eyes. The formations here had been created by gathering the power of all the Daluotian formation masters 10,000 years ago. Only in this way could the passage between the two worlds be stabilized. Of course, they could only stabilize the passage, but not the distorted laws of the outside world. Dao Master Ding's voice resounded throughout the exalted divine palace. Each of you choose a formation to cultivate in. The power accumulated in each formation is roughly the same, but there are also differences in strength. After entering, the formation will be completely sealed and will only open when the power inside is exhausted. Remember to act within your limits. Don't choose formations that overflow with too much power. Chu Xiu looked around and asked Fang Yizhen, "Brother Fang, there are clearly 10 formations here, so why are there only 6 spots?" Fang Yizhen explained, "Although the power accumulated in the formations can be given to us to cultivate at will, we can't overconsume it, so normally we should keep 1 or 2. However, while we keep 1 or 2, we should also keep 1 or 2 for us to choose from." Just now, Dao Master Ding said that one should act within one's strength when choosing a formation. If one rashly enters a formation to cultivate without sufficient power, it is very possible that one will be injured by the overflowing power. Thus, not every formation is suitable for cultivation. This is especially true for the formation in the center. Very few people would choose that formation because it overflows with the most power. Only those with exceptional talent who can contain the greatest amount of power would choose that formation. Brother Chu, for half-step martial immortals like us who want to make a breakthrough to martial immortal realm, it is fine to choose formations with more power. After all, a large amount of power is needed to make a breakthrough. As for a martial immortal like my senior brother, he instead needs formations with the weakest power. That's because he doesn't need to make a breakthrough. He only needs to accumulate power and cross the stable stage. Chu Xiu nodded in understanding. Thank you. After saying that, Chu Xiu actually walked directly towards the array formation in the central region. Seeing that, Fang Yizhen was stunned. Could it be that this brother Chu is the person with exceptional talent that he thinks he is? The others were obviously the same as Fang Yizhen and knew the inside story. They all looked at Chu Xiu with strange gazes. However, no one said anything. Those who were able to reach this stage were not idiots. They all had their own considerations. Since Chu Xiu was confident in absorbing the power in that formation, why would the others say anything? Thus, after being stunned for a moment, the others also entered the formation and prepared to make the best use of their time to cultivate. However, they did not know that the reason Chu Xiu chose that formation was because Jun Wuxian might be on the other side of the formation. Now, Chu Xiu already knew that the Gate of Heaven was the gateway through which people from the lower realm came to the upper realm. The 9 divine generals and the master of the Gate of Heaven guarded the formation of the lower realm. Previously, Shui Wuli had said that the formation would riot every once in a while. Chu Xiu guessed that the cause of the riot was either the accumulation of too much power in the formation, causing it to shake here and there, or it just happened to coincide with the opening of the Daluo Divine Palace and the movement caused by people entering it to cultivate. The only difference was that the formation on the Daluotian side was constantly being maintained. Although the Gate of Heaven was also being maintained, It was obvious that the Formation Grandmaster of the Gate of Heaven was definitely not as strong as the Formation Grandmaster of the Three Pristines Temple. They also needed manpower to suppress it. The 9 divine generals of the Gate of Heaven corresponded to the 9 formations. The one that the Master of the Gate of Heaven corresponded to should naturally be the strongest one. The enmity between Chu Xiu and the Gate of Heaven could be said to be irreconcilable. Back then, Jun Wuxian's 7 arrows almost took his life. However, reason told Chu Xiu that even if he stepped into the martial immortal realm, it was best not to find trouble with Jun Wuxian. Although he could not see through Jun Wuxian's strength, in terms of aura alone, Jun Wuxian was not inferior to Yi Wei Kong of Cold River City. In other words, Jun Wuxian had the strength of a 6th heaven martial immortal, or even a 7th heaven martial immortal. And this time, the Daluo Divine Palace was the time when Chu Xiu was most likely to seriously injure Jun Wuxian and find the opportunity to destroy the Gate of Heaven. Moreover, there was still a strand of Yang source in the Gate of Heaven. As for the destruction of the Gate of Heaven, it would lead to the connection between the upper and lower realms. Chu Xiu was already mentally prepared for this. The Gate of Heaven would be destroyed sooner or later. After it was destroyed, the upper and lower realms would definitely be connected. Therefore, before the connection, Chu Xiu had to make use of the geographical advantage to increase his own strength to a certain extent. Only when he had the upper hand could he make his move. Now, the strength under Chu Xiu's command could be said to dominate the entire lower realms. Especially after Wei Shuya and Shang Tianliang left, it was possible for them to step into the martial immortal realm. Excluding Dugu Weiwei, this kind of strength had even surpassed the Kunlun devil cult of 500 years ago. Naturally, Chu Xiu had a lot less to worry about. Therefore, seriously injuring Jun Wuxian was only the first step. He stepped into the formation. The formation outside had already been sealed, and in an instant, Chu Xiu was enveloped within it. The powerful qi of heaven and earth around him had even turned into a liquid state, enveloping his entire body within it. Exhaling deeply, Chu Xiu began to madly absorb the power within the formation. Regarding Jun Wuxian and the Gate of Heaven, he had to think about it later. What he should do now was to make a breakthrough. Extremely pure qi of vitality flowed into Chu Xiu's body like water. Not only that, within the qi of vitality, there was also some nomological power within it. Here, Chu Xiu was extremely close to the most real place in this world, the place where the 2 realms connected, and also the place of origin of the world. When that power flowed into Chu Xiu's body, it even caused Chu Xiu's entire body to swell up, making him look extremely dangerous. Chu Xiu's entire mind was already empty. What was a martial immortal? A martial immortal was someone who transcended the mortal realm and reached the level of heaven and earth, or even the level of walking on the sky. This was a martial immortal. Martial immortals could rely on their inner strength to transform into flames and ice, because this kind of power originally existed in the world. Martial immortals merely catalyzed it with their inner strength. On the other hand, a martial immortal controlled the rules and changed the rules, causing fire to ignite in water, frost to fly in summer, and turning the impossible into the possible. With regards to the martial immortal realm, Chu Xiu had obtained a lot of experience from Heavenly Soul, and he had many comprehensions himself. At that moment, absorbing this power was like water flowing into a canal. After Chu Xiu's body swelled to its limit, his body suddenly began to shrink. His power was restrained, and it suddenly exploded. Traces of nomological power circled around his body, transforming into earth, wind, water, and fire. At that moment, Chu Xiu had become a martial immortal. However, this was not the end. The qi of the formation he had chosen was too rich. Even though it had supported him to enter the martial immortal realm, it still did not dissipate. Instead, it actively flowed into Chu Xiu's body. However, this was not a problem. Chu Xiu did not reject it at all. He madly absorbed that power, and his realm shot up to level 2. Fang Yizhen said that only gifted martial artists dared to try this formation. He did not know whether Chu Xiu was gifted, but Chu Xiu was confident that his foundation was solid enough. His physical body was strong enough, and it was even stronger than some martial immortals. The power of his primordial soul had also improved after refining the Devil Ghost Soul Crystal. Thus, after breaking through, his foundation was not unstable at all. He could even continue to absorb power and reach level 2. Chapter 1285. In the lower realm's heavenly gate, in a dark hall, Jun Wuxian was surrounded by strange runes. The runes surged into his body one after another, pushing his aura to a new peak. In the end, it was completely digested. Jun Wuxian let out a long breath. His eyes shone with a cold sharpness. Ever since he was injured by the image left behind by Dugu Weiwei several years ago, he had finally recovered to his peak. There was no need to mention the grudge between the Heavenly Gate and Dugu Weiwei. It was a humiliation. In fact, the reason why the Heavenly Gate could continue to exist was because Dugu Weiwei didn't kill him. It was as if he saw a dead dog on the side of the road and couldn't be bothered to step on it. Over the years, the previous masters of the Heavenly Gate had been ashamed of it. Jun Wuxian was no different. But he had his own pride, because he was stronger than the previous master of the Heavenly Gate 500 years ago. Although the Heavenly Gates were connected to the Great Heavenly Divine Palace on the other side due to the passageway connecting the Heavenly Gates to the Great Heavenly Divine Palace on the other side, the number of Heavenly Gates sect masters were all martial immortals. The number of Heavenly Gates sect masters that managed to reach 6th heaven and above could be counted on one's fingers. And Jun Wuxian, after becoming the master of the Heavenly Gate, only used 12 years to go from a half-step martial immortal to a 7th heaven martial immortal. So, he had always thought that if it had been him 500 years ago, the Heavenly Gate wouldn't have been so miserable. But unfortunately, all his pride had been completely shattered by Dugu Weiwei's slap. He couldn't even defeat a mark left behind by Dugu Weiwei. How strong was Dugu Weiwei 500 years ago? He was unreasonably strong. The reason why the Heavenly Gate could guarantee a master of the martial immortal realm was because the Heavenly Gate had the geographical advantage and could borrow the power of the Daluotian. But it was actually very difficult for the cultivators of the other lower realms to become martial immortals. It wasn't that they were inferior to the Daluotian cultivators, but because the difference in the chi of heaven and earth was too great. The cultivators of the lower realms were very far away from the heavens. Of course, it wasn't absolute. Occasionally, some cultivators could cross the gap between heaven and earth and become martial immortals. There were 1 or 2 of them in every generation. For example, the current generation's Yi Shaonan and the Heavenly Master were both qualified to do so. However, a martial immortal was a martial immortal. It was obvious that Dugu Weiwei's strength had reached an abnormal level. Jun Wuxian suspected that even the legendary Celestial Daluo did not have an expert of such a level. Having not left the Gate of Heaven for many years, Jun Wuxian was ready to go out and have a look. The 9 great divine generals of the Elysium were actually not easy to manage. Every one of them could be said to be arrogant and unruly, but because their lives were in the hands of the sect master, they could only be obedient. But even so, they might still cause some trouble. While he was in seclusion, he didn't know if they were honest or not. With that thought in mind, Jun Wuxian was just about to walk out when a violent fluctuation suddenly came from the dim ceremony behind him. This caused Jun Wuxian's expression to change. Although the formation that the sect master of heaven was guarding was the strongest, it was also the one that had the fewest riots. This formation wouldn't riot easily. Moreover, the array formation's riot was also time-specific. Normally, there would be a very small riot every few months. That was because the opposite side's spiritual chi was abnormal, or because the array formation was loosening, resulting in a riot. Only after 70 to 80 years would there be a big riot. But this time, why was it brought forward? At that moment, the formation in the palace lit up and the voice of the first divine general of heaven, Diwu Song, sounded anxiously. Sect Master, this is bad. 5 formations are violently rioting. This time, the riot of the formation has been brought forward. Jun Wuxian took a deep breath and said, not 5, but 6. The formation here is also rioting. Send down the order to all the divine generals of heaven to return to their positions. The other divine generals of heaven whose formations are not rioting are to immediately help the others stabilize the formation. Tell them to do their best to stabilize the formation. If anyone dares to play any tricks at this time, I will do another ranking of the divine generals. After all, there are more than 1 or 2 divine generals in the secret land of heaven. Sect Master. Diwu Chi Song immediately went to make the arrangements. Jun Wuxian immediately used his power to seal the formation as fast as possible. At that moment, at the absolute heaven side, Chu Xiu had used 7 days' time to completely stabilize his power. Furthermore, after reaching the martial immortal realm, he had directly reached the second heaven. He no longer needed to enter closed-door training to stabilize his power. But at that moment, Chu Xiu squinted his eyes and looked at the formation in front of him. After becoming a martial immortal, Chu Xiu could truly control the power of rules. Therefore, he became more sensitive to the changes of the power of rules. Now, he could feel that there were some changes on the other side of the formation. It seemed to have become stronger and more resilient. Previously, when he was refining the power, the matrix had shaken for a while. In the end, there was a force that stopped the shaking. It was obvious that it was just as he had guessed. There was someone on the other side, and he was 90% sure that it was Jun Wuxian. But the problem now was, how was Chu Xiu going to injure Jun Wuxian through the formation? It was too obvious to directly attack the formation with his power. Not to mention whether he could injure Jun Wuxian, who was far more powerful than him. If he alerted the Tao Master, it would not be worth it. Rubbing his chin, Chu Xiu suddenly thought of something. He raised his hand and the 6 paths of reincarnation bracelet shone brightly. In an instant, the surging power of the primordial spirit spread along the formation. The power would cause the formation to riot, but the power of the primordial spirit would target Jun Wuxian. Moreover, Chu Xiu had learned a lot of information about Jun Wuxian from the traitor divine general Shui Wuli in the heavenly gates. The 6 paths of Buddha disillusionment wheel that Jun Wuxian cultivated was like a Buddha, but not a Buddha, like a demon, but not a demon. He had to put his state of mind into the illusion of the 6 paths of reincarnation to temper it. But the illusion formed by the pure power of the cultivation method was like actively triggering the demons in one's heart. Was the power of that illusion stronger than the illusion in the 6 paths of reincarnation bracelet? Chu Xiu only hoped that the distance between the 2 worlds was shorter. Otherwise, his power of the primordial spirit would not be enough. On the side of the heavenly gates, all of Jun Wuxian's power was poured into the formation. The surrounding Yuan Qi had even been compressed into threads by the power of rules. The threads of Yuan Qi danced in the air, repairing the formation that was already damaged and old. But at that moment, Diu Qi Song's scream suddenly came from outside. Jun Wuxian was stunned and shouted, "What's going on? Has the formation been broken?" Diu Qi Song shouted, "Sect Master, run. Zhong Shenxiu has attacked our heavenly gates. All the divine generals can't even block one move from him." Jun Wuxian's expression suddenly changed. He had just taken a step forward, but he immediately stopped. Looking at the hall that he was most familiar with, he said coldly, "What kind of evil ghost is this? Show yourself." At the moment when Diwu Qi Song screamed, Jun Wuxian really thought that the heavenly gates had been broken. But when Diwu Qi Song said that Zhong Shenxiu had attacked, Jun Wuxian realized that he should have fallen into an illusion, because it was impossible for Zhong Shenxiu to attack the heavenly gates. Although he didn't know what Zhong Shenxiu's background was, he knew that Zhong Shenxiu had his own set of rules. As long as you didn't violate his rules, he would not attack. There was silence in the entire hall. No one responded to Jun Wuxian. But in the next moment, everything began to dissipate and was replaced by a vast expanse of white space. In this space, the surrounding 6 realms rotated. The extravagant and extravagant celestial realm, the cruel slaughter of Azura realm, the various forms of the human realm, the endless pain of hell realm, the ferocious evil of hungry ghost realm, and the helplessness of animal realm, all appeared in front of Jun Wuxian. Jun Wuxian frowned. He didn't even know how he had fallen into this place. The only explanation was that the power on the other side of the formation was strange. When all his efforts were focused on repairing the formation, he had unknowingly fallen into an illusion. Could it be that he had fallen into chi deviation? When he cultivated the 6 paths of Buddha's disillusionment light wheel, he had taken the initiative to arouse his inner demons. He used the power of the cultivation method to construct the 6 paths of reincarnation and put his spirit into it to hone it. In the end, he managed to cultivate this cultivation method. Could it be that this 6 paths of reincarnation was also formed by his spirit? Before Jun Wuxian could react, he had already been thrown into the animal realm. Throwing Jun Wuxian into the animal realm wasn't something that Chu Xiu wanted to humiliate Jun Wuxian on purpose. Although he had a death feud with Jun Wuxian, Chu Xiu wasn't so narrow-minded that he would use such a senseless method to humiliate Jun Wuxian. The first was the animal realm because the 6 paths of reincarnation bracelet itself had the strongest sequence of usage. When Chu Xiu was pulled into the illusion of the demonic ghost, the first thing he experienced was the animal realm. After that, he experienced the other realms, and then the human realm. At that time, the demonic ghost in the reincarnation stone only had instincts, but it was this instinct that dug out the loopholes in people's hearts to the greatest extent. Warriors who had reached the level of Chu Xiu were extremely arrogant. Even if they didn't show it on the outside, there was bound to be arrogance in their hearts and they couldn't be easily humiliated. The first person to throw him into the animal realm was to provoke his anger. After that, he experienced the other 5 realms, each with a different outcome. If you could withstand it and think that the illusion was over, then people would be the most relaxed. However, this was the most dangerous time. After experiencing the countless reincarnations of the human realm, a huge amount of memories were stuffed into the brain. Those who didn't have a strong will were the most likely to lose themselves. With such a set of experiences, Chu Xiu almost couldn't withstand it back then. At this time, Jun Wuxian was the same. The reincarnation of the animal realm only made his eyes show a hint of anger. After that, he experienced the other 5 realms, but his expression didn't change. But until the end, when the human realm began and the endless reincarnation began, Jun Wuxian's expression finally changed. Chapter 1286. In the 6 paths of reincarnation, the reincarnation of the human path finally caused a crack to appear in Jun Wuxian's iron-like state of mind. He didn't know what was going on. He had fallen into the 6 paths of reincarnation inexplicably. Every reincarnation was extremely real. All kinds of memories and emotions impacted his state of mind. 1 reincarnation, 2 reincarnations, 9 reincarnations and 10 reincarnations. Facing these reincarnations, Jun Wuxian's mind was like a thread. No matter how the memories impacted him, he couldn't break through. He was Jun Wuxian. Jun Wuxian was the strongest among all the previous masters of the Elysium. Other than the few ancestors who had founded the Elysium and the Elysium sect master, no one else could compare to him. It was said that experts were lonely, but Jun Wuxian had cultivated to this level when there were not many warriors of the same level as him in the lower world. One could imagine how tough his mind was. If it was said that Chu Xiu was able to hold on in this reincarnation by relying on his own willpower and enlightenment, then Jun Wuxian was purely holding on. At this time, the reincarnation had been carried out more than 20 times, and Chu Xiu was almost unable to hold on. He couldn't clearly feel Jun Wuxian's state. After all, it was the separation matrix that transmitted the power of the primordial spirit, so the speed of the consumption of the primordial spirit was faster than under normal circumstances when he used the 6 paths of reincarnation bracelet. Now he was at his limit. If this continued, Jun Wuxian's primordial spirit might not collapse, but he would face a backlash. When his primordial spirit was about to be exhausted, Chu Xiu had to put away the 6 paths of reincarnation bracelet. He didn't know the situation on the other side. He didn't know what state Jun Wuxian was in after more than 20 reincarnations. But it didn't matter. Chu Xiu still had a spy in the Elysium. When the time came, he could find out more information. At this time in the lower world, when Jun Wuxian left the more than 20 reincarnations, his mind was already in a trance. In the 6 paths of reincarnation, no matter how strong your strength was, it was useless. This kind of power tempered your state of mind and your willpower. Although Jun Wuxian had pulled through, his condition was not very good. Most importantly, he was still giving his all to the array formation, but his consciousness was still in a trance. As for Chu Xiu, he had already stopped absorbing the Yuan Qi, and the array formation had already calmed down. Therefore, in the lower realm, the power condensed in the formation had already begun to overflow. Feeling the wave of power, Jun Wuxian seemed to come back to his senses a little, but it was already too late. Damn it. The next moment, a powerful force suddenly erupted, and Jun Wuxian was directly blasted out of his main hall by the force of the explosion of the matrix. Even the entire Kunlun mountain range where the Gate of Heaven was located made a huge tremor, and an avalanche occurred in an instant. At this time, the other god generals had already calmed down the formation. When they saw Jun Wuxian's appearance, they immediately rushed over to check on the situation. When they saw Jun Wuxian covered in blood, everyone's eyes were filled with disbelief. In their eyes, Jun Wuxian was a godlike existence. But why was their god in such a wretched state? All of you, get back! Jun Wuxian roared. Everyone was stunned for a moment, but in the next moment, no one dared to stay, and they all returned to their own main hall. In front of Jun Wuxian, no one dared to disobey his orders. Clutching his chest, Jun Wuxian spat out another mouthful of blood. Since the last time he left the Gate of Heaven, he had been recuperating. First, he was injured by Zhong Shenxiu, but fortunately it was not too serious. In the end, just as he recovered, he was injured by the mark left by Dugu Weiwei. It took a few years for him to return to his peak. He did not expect that the injury this time would be even more serious, and even hurt his foundation. When Zhong Shenxiu said that he could not leave the Gate of Heaven for 300 years, he thought it was a kind of restriction, but now it seemed that it was a warning. Jun Wuxian looked at his main hall, and there was a trace of fear in his eyes. This time, he was inexplicably injured. It was definitely not because of qi deviation, but because there was a change in the array formation. This kind of unknown change caused a layer of haze to appear in his heart. At that moment, on the other side of the Daluocean, Chu Xiu had finished absorbing the energy. Furthermore, he had also recovered the power of his primordial spirit to its peak. However, he did not stay in the array formation for too long. The others should have finished absorbing the energy. If he stayed for too long, he might arouse suspicion. Sure enough, when Chu Xiu came out, the others were already waiting for him. After refining the power of the Daluocean Divine Palace, everyone's strength had increased greatly. Of the remaining 5, Fang Yizhen and Ouyang Xing had reached the first martial immortal realm, while Su Guishan and Fa Jing had reached the third martial immortal realm. The most surprising was Yi Guixia. He had also reached the third martial immortal realm. Of course, the crowd was only slightly surprised, but did not think too much about it. Yi Guixia was already a half-step martial immortal. Having stayed in that realm for so long, he must have accumulated a terrifying amount of power. Little did they know, after Chu Xiu came out, the others were even more surprised. The reason for that was because Chu Xiu had actually reached the second martial immortal realm. One must know that how long had it been since Chu Xiu became a half-step martial immortal? In fact, it had only been a few years since he became a profound understanding cultivator. How much power could he have accumulated? He had actually directly surpassed 2 heavens. Could it be that the power of the array formation in the center was truly that astonishing? The crowd did not think too much about it. Regardless of whether they had any grudges against one another, they all congratulated one another. The path of martial cultivation was a long and arduous one. While they might have grudges against one another, they were all on the same path at that moment. At that moment, the Tao Exalted's voice sounded in the crowd's ears. Congratulations on becoming a martial immortal. You are now able to stand at the peak of the heaven realm and control yourselves. The entrance to the formation has been opened. You may all leave now. Following the Tao Exalted's voice, a formation entrance appeared before them. Chu Xiu and the others stepped into it. When they reappeared, they were already outside the central province. In the eastern region, the people from the High Heaven Sect and the Royal Sky Pavilion, as well as Lu Fengxian and the others were all there. Most importantly, Wuxia was there too. Furthermore, the power that he was releasing was shockingly in the martial immortal realm. In fact, Wuxia had already attracted a lot of attention when he came out of the central province. The situation in the central province was special. Regardless of one's strength, as long as one did not die after entering the central province, one would be able to reap some benefits. As such, it was normal for true fire and spirit refinement cultivators to enter and profound understanding cultivators to come out. It was also normal for half-step martial immortals to enter and profound understanding cultivators to come out. However, without entering the Daluo Divine Palace, Wuxia entered with profound understanding cultivator of heaven and earth and came out with martial immortal cultivation. That was rather shocking. However, Chu Xiu was mentally prepared. Ning Xuanji had told him that as long as Old Man Wei survived this trial, there would be a fortuitous encounter for him. Although Ning Xuanji did not say what this fortuitous encounter was, it was obvious that with Ning Xuanji's strength and identity, advancing from profound understanding cultivator of heaven and earth to half-step martial immortal was not considered a fortuitous encounter. At this moment, Wuxia's emotions were also very excited and complicated. He did not expect to run into a legendary existence like Ning Xuanji. However, by the time he woke up, his impression of Ning Xuanji had been completely shattered. Although Ning Xuanji was supposed to be an enemy of the demonic sect, he still could not bear it. The legendary immortal Ning Xuanji, who was famous in the lower realm, turned out to be an old Taoist priest who spoke vulgarities. Chu Xiu greeted everyone. Although they still had a lot to say, some things involved Ning Xuanji and some secrets. It was clearly not appropriate to talk about them here. Lu Sanjin and the others from the Royal Sky Pavilion also came over to congratulate Chu Xiu. TSK's comparisons are really odious. We're all participating in the competition for the Daluo Divine Palace, but I've basically been enjoying the scenery along the way. Lu Sanjin's tone was filled with envy. Chu Xiu had advanced from profound understanding cultivator to second heavenly layer martial immortal, while he had only advanced from early profound understanding cultivator to peak profound understanding cultivator. Envy was a little unnecessary. Chu Xiu's achievements were no longer something he could be envious of, but he was still very envious. This time, the Royal Sky Pavilion is actually very lucky. At the very least, they didn't suffer any losses. That's very rare. Lu Sanjin curled his lips and said, there are only 2 or 3 of them. They're so cowardly that they don't even dare to enter the center of the central province. If we lose them again, we'll be in big trouble. Zhong Qiushui was the one who told Lu Sanjin to hide in the outer region of the central province. She also told him that it was the experience of the predecessors and that it was absolutely safe. Although it was safe, Lu Sanjin was still a cultivator of the younger generation. Although he usually appeared to be indifferent, he was actually quite spirited. It was not easy to enter the central province, but he didn't even see the shadow of the exalted divine palace. This undoubtedly made him a little unhappy. At this time, several people from the High Heaven sect came over. Elder Wu, who had stopped Chu Xiu from killing Xinyuan Wushuang, came over anxiously and asked, "Young Master Chu, did you see Wushuang in the mist?" "I saw him," Chu Xiu said indifferently. Elder Wu hurriedly asked, "Where did Wushuang go in the end?" Chu Xiu spread out his hands and said, "How would I know? I entered the exalted divine palace in the end, but Xinyuan Wushuang didn't." At this time, another High Heaven sect elder came over angrily and said, "But someone saw Wushuang with you in the end. He was fighting with 2 prime venerables at that time, and then you killed them. How could you not know where he went?" Chu Xiu's eyes turned cold, and a powerful pressure unique to martial immortals spread out from his body. "Elder, please watch your attitude. I'm not a member of your High Heaven sect. If it weren't for me, that ignorant idiot Xinyuan Wushuang would have been killed by Chen Jiolong and Su Jiang. Now that he can't be found, you're asking me for him? What a joke. I'm not Xinyuan Wushuang's father. Do you think I'll protect him all the way to the exalted divine palace?" Chapter 1287. With Chu Xiu's current strength and status, this high heaven sect elder running over and questioning him in such a tone was simply courting death. It was true that Chu Xiu wanted to join forces with high heaven sect, but it didn't mean that he had to lower his voice to high heaven sect. After all, the entire high heaven sect still owed him a favor. Seeing that the atmosphere between the two sides had become tense, Elder Wu hurriedly stepped forward and said, "Official Chu, please calm down." Elder Lin didn't mean that. He was just worried about Wuxia. Chu Xiu said indifferently, "It's not like you don't know the situation of the Daluo Divine Palace. What's the use of being anxious? Xianyuan Wuxia hasn't come out yet, so I'm afraid he won't be able to come out. Your High Heaven sect should have left some kind of mark on Xianyuan Wuxia. Now that you've returned to High Heaven sect, maybe you've already found the answer." Hearing Chu Xiu's words, Elder Wu and the others had no choice but to leave. Even without mentioning the fact that their High Heaven sect still owed Chu Xiu a favor, Chu Xiu had already reached the martial immortal realm and was no longer someone who could be easily questioned. Martial immortals and non-martial immortals were two different levels of existence. After exchanging greetings, the group left the central province. On the way, when there was no one else around, Mei Qinglian finally released her curiosity and asked Chu Xiu and Wei Shuya. After Chu Xiu briefly told everyone about Ning Xuanji, it was obvious that they couldn't accept that the legendary immortal Ning Xuanji had such a personality. Mei Qinglian couldn't help but shake her head and sigh. Sure enough, legends can't be trusted. Things from 500 years ago have long changed. Lu Jianghu said disdainfully, "The righteous path can't produce anyone at all. That's why they put Ning Xuanji on such a high pedestal. Of course, in other words, the strongest chosen according to their standards doesn't exist at all." Qin Di shook his head regretfully after hearing this. What a miscalculation. If I had known that immortal Ning Xuanji was in the Daluo Divine Palace, I would have entered earlier. Chu Xiu also asked curiously, "Alliance Master Qin, I didn't see you in the hinterland of the central province. What did you do after entering the central province?" Qin Di spread out his hands and said, "I just killed demonic ghosts. These fey ghosts weren't hard to kill, but they were hard to deal with. After killing them, I refined their soul crystals. After all, the power of my primordial spirit was also a weakness. As an outsider, I didn't want to enter the Daluo Divine Palace to cultivate, so there was no point in keeping the soul crystals. But who would have thought that the demonic ghosts seemed to have their eyes on me? They followed me wherever I went, and the more I killed, the stronger they became. I've been killing demonic ghosts and refining soul crystals all this time. But then again, this really is a good place. The power of my spirit has skyrocketed several times over." Chu Xiu was a little speechless after listening to Qin Di. He finally knew what was going on. Qin Di was the same as him. He refined the demonic ghost's soul crystals and ended up being haunted by them. The difference was that Chu Xiu didn't continue refining the soul crystals after learning of the news, while Qin Di kept refining them, which led to him being besieged by the demonic ghosts. Chu Xiu turned his gaze to Wei Shuya and asked, "Elder Wei, what happened back then? Were you sucked into that place as soon as you entered the central province?" Wei Shuya smiled bitterly. "More or less. I just finished off a few demonic ghosts when I noticed a vortex appearing around me. I thought it was the work of the demonic ghosts, but I didn't expect it to be spatial materialization. After being sucked into the city of tragic deaths, I was immediately besieged by the demonic ghosts and fell into an illusion. If it weren't for Ning Xuanji's voice passing through the illusion and reminding me, I would have been in deep trouble this time." Wei Shuya had mixed feelings about being saved by a great enemy of the Kunlun devil cult. However, it was Lu Jianghu who curled his lips. This matter was caused by that old fellow Ning Xuanji in the first place. The main culprit was him. Wei Shuya changed the topic and said, "However, this matter is also an opportunity. The soul crystals of the demonic ghosts not only contain the power of their souls, but they also contain extremely pure vitality. After I survived the illusion, the power in the soul crystals of the demonic ghosts was absorbed into my body without the slightest hindrance. I stepped into the martial immortal realm in one fell swoop. Wei Shia made it sound easy, but in fact he himself knew the dangers involved. With Wei Shia's tenacity, he wouldn't be afraid if it was a single demonic ghost. However, it was an illusion formed by dozens of demonic ghosts. Its power was astonishingly powerful. Even with Wei Shia's current state of mind, he was almost lost in it. He only managed to survive by sheer willpower. After returning to the southern barbaric land, everyone had to discuss matters. Qin Di went into closed-door training. He wasn't a blind person. Although he had a good relationship with Chu Xiu and the others, he wasn't Chu Xiu's subordinate after all. It was better not to know some of the secrets of the Kunlun devil cult. After Qin Di left, Chu Xiu gathered everyone and told them about the Elysium. If it was before, everyone would definitely think that Chu Xiu was crazy when they heard that Chu Xiu was going to fight with the Elysium. But now, they thought that it was normal, because the strength of Chu Xiu's subordinates had far surpassed that of the Elysium. The Kunlun devil cult could look down on the other 9 divine generals of the Elysium. The only troublesome one was Jun Wuxian, the unknown master of the Elysium. Wei Shia stroked the beard on his chin and muttered, "How confident are you?" Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, "Excluding Jun Wuxian, 100%. But if Jun Wuxian is included, to be honest, I'm not sure either. Apart from the battle with Zhong Shenxiu, Jun Wuxian hasn't really revealed his strength. But I can see that his aura isn't any weaker than Yi Weikong's, so he's at least a 7th heaven martial immortal." Shuewuli also said that the 7 nailing arrows that Jun Wuxian used to plot against me was something he found at the last minute and learned in a very short period of time. Jun Wuxian's strength is definitely not weak to be able to master a divine power so easily. However, this is also our best chance. In the formation, I've already used the 6 paths of reincarnation bracelet to pull his soul into the 6 paths of reincarnation. But his soul was exhausted too much, so I wasn't able to completely defeat him. If we miss this chance, who knows how long we'll have to wait to seriously injure a 7th heaven martial immortal expert. We can't miss this chance. Hearing Chu Xiu's words, everyone present nodded their heads. Even though there were risks in the plan, they were already used to it. When did Chu Xiu's plan not have risks? But in the end, they still won. At that moment, Chu Xiu took out the special soul crystals he obtained from the city of the wronged and distributed them to everyone. These special soul crystals contain extremely pure energy. After refining them, there won't be any backlash or burden. Everyone, pick out the attributes that suit you and refine them. Try to push your strength to the peak before attacking the heavenly gates. Among the people present, Wei Shia was already a martial immortal. Now, he only needed to stabilize his foundation of power. Shang Tianliang also obtained a lot of benefits this time. He was only a step away from becoming a martial immortal. Whether or not he could make a breakthrough would depend on luck. Lu Jianghu also gained a lot. Previously, in the city of the wronged, he saw the transformation of the rules of power and had an epiphany, allowing him to step into the half-step martial immortal realm. As for Mei Qinglian and Lu Fengxian, it wouldn't be a problem for them to push their foundation of power forward with the soul crystals. As for whether or not they could take advantage of the opportunity to step into the half-step martial immortal realm, that was an unknown. Chu Wuji could also use the soul crystals to step into the next realm. Furthermore, Chu Wuji's foundation of power was extremely solid, so he wouldn't have to worry about the instability of his realm after making a breakthrough. After the discussion, everyone went into closed-door training. They wanted to push their strength to the next level before attacking the heavenly gates. Chu Xiu didn't have to worry about that. He had already used the power of the Daluo Divine Palace to stabilize his realm. Now, he only needed to plan out the details of the attack on the heavenly gates. Inside the secret chamber, Chu Xiu summoned his inner demon. The inner demon hadn't appeared in the central planes because it was useless against the demonic ghosts. The demonic ghosts weren't humans, so the inner demon couldn't invade their minds. Besides, things without intelligence would be useless even if the inner demon managed to invade their minds. But this time, when the inner demon appeared again, it had a solemn look on its face. It sat cross-legged in Chu Xiu's mind as if it was thinking about something. Seeing the inner demon like that, Chu Xiu couldn't help but ask, are you thinking about life? The inner demon actually nodded when it heard Chu Xiu's question. You're not human, so why are you thinking about life? The inner demon retorted, what human? I can think and I have the memories of a human. Apart from the fact that I don't have a body, what's the difference between me and a human? The demonic ghosts from the Daluo Divine Palace gave me an idea. They don't have bodies, but through the power of laws, they can reconstruct their bodies, turning from human to demonic ghosts, and then from demonic ghosts back to human. Since that's the case, they can do it, but why can't I? Didn't you say before that you wanted to find a perfect body for me to possess? But now, I've suddenly changed my mind. An outsider's body is, in the end, an outsider's body. My own body is the most suitable for me. How about we make a deal? Why don't you help me reconstruct my body? I know that you've already grasped the demonic path of creation. Furthermore, you've become a martial immortal and grasped the power of laws. To you, that is not something impossible. Chu Xiu rubbed his chin. After pondering for a moment, he said, you're quite creative. However, if that's the case, you'll have to wait for a very long time. After all, although I am able to control the demonic path of creation and the power of laws, I do not have complete control over them. The inner demon nodded and said, I know that. It doesn't matter. I've already waited for 800 years. What's there to wait for? That said, if you're able to enter the primitive demon cave again and bring out another portion of my power, I reckon I'll be even stronger. Chu Xiu sneered. That place is not that easy to enter. Even if you have the strength, you'll still have to wait for the right opportunity. Enough with the superfluous words. Help me contact Xuewuli. I want to know the current situation of the heavenly gates. Chapter 1288. In the Gate of Heaven, Xuewuli went to the elixir hall to receive his share of cultivation elixirs. All the warriors who had participated in the sealing of the Array's rebellion had consumed a lot of their energy, so they needed some elixirs to recover their energy. At this time, Xuewuli's shoulder was suddenly patted by someone. He shivered and jumped to the side. Lin Zonglong, who was also a divine general of the Gate of Heaven, frowned and said, Xuewuli, what's wrong? Why do I feel like you're not in your right mind? Xuewuli smiled bitterly and said, we just experienced such a serious Array rebellion, and even the gate master was injured. I'm just a little worried. Lin Zonglong waved his hand casually and said, don't worry too much. This is very normal. The sealing Array will have a violent rebellion from time to time. This time, it was just a little too violent. It's just that you've been like this ever since you came back from outside. Why did you lose your soul outside? Xuewuli forced a smile and said, Divine General Lin must be joking. I've always been like this. I'll go back first. Because of the Array rebellion, I've consumed a lot of energy. I need to replenish it now. As he spoke, Xuewuli hurriedly left, leaving Lin Zonglong with a baffled look on his face. He muttered, could it be that this boy has been mesmerized by the outside world? Newcomers are so ignorant. What's so good about the outside world? How can it be as comfortable as cultivating in the Gate of Heaven? Lin Zonglong was only a little curious about Xuewuli, but he did not pursue the matter. Although Lin Zonglong had previously said that the disturbance of the Array formation was a very normal thing, he knew that it was actually not normal this time. Every time the Array rebellion was violent, Jun Wuxian would be fine. But this time, Jun Wuxian had been seriously injured. This was something that had never happened before. Lin Zonglong, who regarded Jun Wuxian as a god, was not used to it. Returning to his own hall, Xuewuli immediately closed the door and let out a long sigh. He thought that his state of mind was very strong, but in reality, he had been cultivating in the Gate of Heaven since he was young. The so-called state of mind was just the willpower that was tempered through fighting. In normal times, it was indeed powerful enough, but in times like this, it was clearly not enough. Ever since he had returned from Chu Xiu's place, he had a feeling that he would be exposed at any time and then be tortured by the Elysium's torture, unable to live or die. Ever since that time, he had even spent less time sleeping. Most of the time, he relied on meditation to recover his energy. Because once he fell asleep, he would dream of himself being exposed. Lin Songlong was right. He was indeed distracted. If this continued, he would probably go crazy. Xue Wuli even had a very radical idea. He wanted the Elysium to perish as soon as possible. If the Elysium was really destroyed one day, he might not have to continue living in fear. At this moment, Xue Wuli's head suddenly hurt and a voice appeared in his mind. This caused Xue Wuli to be extremely frightened. But then he realized that this was actually Chu Xiu's voice. Only then did he remember that although Chu Xiu had destroyed the restriction in his mind, Chu Xiu had left something in his mind. It should be that thing that was causing trouble now. Before Xue Wuli could speak, Chu Xiu's voice rang in his ear again. Time is pressing, don't talk nonsense. I only have one question for you. Jun Wuxian, what's the situation now? Although Xue Wuli's mind had a part of the power of the inner demon, to directly transmit the voice into Xue Wuli's mind, the amount of mental energy consumed was too shocking. Hence, Chu Xiu could only save some time. Xue Wuli was stunned for a moment, then immediately said, Master? Jun Wuxian was injured by the backlash of the formation, and the injury is very serious. The fluctuations have even shaken the entire Kunlun Mountains. Now the master is in seclusion to recover from his injuries, and it is unknown when he will come out. After hearing Xue Wuli's words, Chu Xiu cut off the connection. On Xue Wuli's side, there was a look of contemplation in his eyes. Although there was a general pattern to the formation's backlash, it was only a general pattern. Even the exact year could not be determined. It was possible that there was a difference of 10 or 20 years between them. So how did Chu Xiu know that something had happened to Jun Wuxian? Even if he could feel the tremors from East Kunlun, how could he be sure that it was Jun Wuxian who had an accident? This kind of thing made Xue Wuli have a bold guess, but he only guessed half of it and did not dare to think any further. At that moment, in the Daluotian Mountains, after knowing Jun Wuxian's condition, Chu Xiu had already made preparations to attack the Gate of Heaven. Taking advantage of Jun Wuxian's injury, this was practically the best opportunity for Chu Xiu. If he was unable to destroy the Gate of Heaven this time, it was likely that he would have to wait until he reached the seventh heaven of martial Immortal for the next time. However, if he were to take action now, Chu Xiu would need to plan more. After all, according to Xue Wuli, the divine generals of the Gate of Heaven were not the only threats in the Gate of Heaven. There were also thousands of martial artists hidden in the secret realm who were being slaughtered by the Gate of Heaven. At that moment, in the lower realm, within the Storm Sword Tomb, a gloomy black fog enveloped the entire Storm Sword Tomb. Broken swords were stuck in the Storm Sword Tomb. Although it was a scene filled with sword qi, it appeared gloomy and dilapidated at that moment. Zhongli Mu sat beside the Storm Sword Tomb. His face was ashen, and it was obvious that he did not have long to live. He was a person from the previous era, a disciple of Sword Emperor Xin Kangwu. Although he did not officially participate in the Great War 500 years ago, he had witnessed the fall of that generation with his own eyes. He had relied on a secret technique to survive for so many years. However, with a single punch from Qinqing Di, his sword heart that he had nurtured for hundreds of years was shattered. Everything was fabricated, everything was a joke. So what if he had lived for hundreds of years? In this world, it was not a matter of who lived longer, who was stronger. At that moment, a barefooted young martial artist in white walked behind Zhongli Mu and said softly, "Ancestor, are you looking for me?" The young man was Yan Ji of the Storm Sword Tomb. His appearance had not changed in the slightest from over 10 years ago, but his temperament had become more stable. Moreover, he had also reached the mysterious realm of heaven and earth and had officially taken over the Storm Sword Tomb as its ruler. The Storm Sword Tomb was not so much a sect, but a loose alliance. Therefore, there was no sect master or sect master. Every generation, a ruler would be chosen to be responsible for dealing with the outside world. Ever since the Great War on Floating Jade Mountain, Yanji had frequently appeared in the Jianghu. Moreover, his ability and strength were suitable. Naturally, he had taken over the Storm Sword Tomb 2 years ago. Zhongli Mu said indifferently, "I'm going to die." Yan Ji's expression changed slightly. He quickly said, "Ancestor." Zhongli Mu waved his hand and interrupted Yan Ji. Previously, I was able to live after my lifespan was exhausted because I had refined the longevity sword's sword spirit into my body, replacing the vitality in my dantian. However, Chen Qingdi's punch had completely shattered it. Therefore, I do not have much time left to live. In this last period of time, I want to give you something. As Zhongli Mu spoke, he formed a seal with his hand. In the entire storm sword tomb, countless swords trembled and let out a drawn-out sword cry. The black fog swirled and finally turned into something that looked like a black dragon. It let out a sword cry that echoed throughout the storm sword tomb. What is this? Yan Ji's face was filled with shock. He could feel that the power emitted from the black dragon was simply shocking. Zhongli Mu said, "This is a sword soul. A sword soul born in the entire storm sword tomb." At this point, Zhongli Mu's tone slowed down. He looked ahead and slowly said, "In the entire storm sword tomb, only I know of its existence. Actually, I have a selfish motive. There are countless swords buried in the storm sword tomb. Countless sword spirits dissipate. When they accumulate to a certain extent, they will form a sword soul. However, this process may take hundreds or even thousands of years. Therefore, in the storm sword tomb, there are very few records about sword souls. Even if they appear, the ancestors of the storm sword tomb would not use them. Only my master, the sword monarch, Jianghu, created 8,000 sword techniques in his life. In terms of the study of the sword Dao, even sword Saint Gu Qingqing could not compare to my master. He found a way to refine the sword soul and use it. At this point, Zhongli Mu suddenly turned to look at Yan Ji and said, "But all of this was destroyed by me. After my master passed away, no one in the storm sword tomb knows about this except for me." Yan Ji was stunned. He wanted to say something, but in the end, he swallowed his words. Zhongli Mu laughed at himself and said, "You have guessed it, right? The reason is simple. I have a selfish motive. I want to monopolize the sword soul and reach the legendary realm, the realm that even my master could not reach. Therefore, I did not choose to die in the storm sword tomb even though I knew my lifespan was coming to an end. Instead, I chose to refine the longevity sword that has been with me for hundreds of years. I relied on the sword spirit's power to live until today. However, fate makes fools of people. I waited for so many years, but the sword soul could not form. It was only after my dantian was destroyed by Chen Qingdi that the sword soul finally formed. Perhaps this is fate. I sacrificed the sword to live. My heart no longer has the spirit of a swordsman. All I have is the greed for life and power. How could someone like me be worthy of the sword soul condensed by countless sword Dao grandmasters and countless famous swords in the sword tomb?" Yan Ji wanted to say something, but Zhongli Mu shook his head and said, "I do not have much time left. You just need to listen. Later, I will help you refine the sword soul. You may reach the legendary realm. The future of the storm sword tomb is in your hands. I do not know if this is right or wrong, but I have no other choice. I only have one request. Bury me next to my master." Chapter 1289. When a person was about to die, they would be able to see through many things. It was a pity that Zhongli Mu had finally seen through all of this, but he no longer had time. However, Yan Ji was at a loss. This was different from the sword venerable Zhongli Mu in his memories. Although Zhongli Mu often cultivated in seclusion, he would give guidance to his disciples as soon as he came out. How could the founder of their Windcloud sword tomb be such a selfish person? But now that Zhongli Mu had personally told him about it, Yan Ji didn't know how to respond to it. Zhongli Mu said in a low voice, "I don't have much time. Sit down and calm your mind. Empty your dantian and transfer all of your power to your meridians. Then recite this mantra." With that, Zhongli Mu pointed at Yan Ji's forehead. His entire body was instantly enveloped by sword aura. Yan Ji could not refuse. He did not even have time to think. He could only subconsciously follow Zhongli Mu's instructions. In the next moment, Zhongli Mu waved his hand. The black dragon formed by the sword's soul struggled, but it was enveloped by boundless sword aura and entered Yan Ji's body. In that instant, Zhongli Mu seemed to have aged a few decades. His hair and beard were all white, the color of decay. However, the sword aura in his hand did not relax at all. It forcefully suppressed the sword soul and helped Yan Ji fuse with it. In an instant, the power around Yan Ji's body reached its peak. Cracks appeared all over his body as if his entire body was about to explode. Seeing this, Zhongli Mu waved his hand. His primordial spirit burned with golden light. He erupted with the last bit of power and finally suppressed the backlash. In the next moment, sword aura around Yan Ji soared into the sky. The astonishing sword aura had even reached the level of disrupting the laws, tearing the heavens and splitting the earth. Seeing this, a hint of a smile appeared in Zhongli Mu's rotten and turbid eyes. The pinnacle of martial arts, an immortal of the sword. That was a level that even his teacher hadn't been able to reach. Maybe Sword Saint Gu Qingqing had been able to reach that level 500 years ago, but when he was young, he challenged Lonely Only Wa and died. Shen Kengwu had studied the method to refine sword souls for his entire life, but he was born at the wrong time. Zhongli Mu had waited his entire life, but in the end, his opportunity never came. But now, before he died, he finally saw it. The gap between man and nature, the legendary bottleneck of martial immortal, had been broken by his own hands. After a long while, when Yan Ji had calmed the violent energy in his body and opened his eyes again, he saw Zhongli Mu, who was already at the end of his rope. Ancestral Master. Zhongli Mu looked at Yan Ji and smiled. He pointed at his chest, but he didn't say anything. In the next moment, he was no longer breathing. The next moment, he was already dead. Yan Ji hugged Zhongli Mu's corpse and roared. Sword Qi soared into the sky. He didn't care whether Zhongli Mu was a selfish person or not. After so many years, he had sincerely thought about the prosperity of the Wind Cloud Sword Tomb. Every time he came out of seclusion, he would use a small amount of time to give pointers to the younger generation. In fact, what he used up was his lifespan. If he had remained in secluded cultivation, he might have lived for a few more decades until the birth of a sword soul. Yan Ji removed Zhongli Mu's hand from his chest and said in a deep voice, Ancestral Master, I know what you mean. My Wind Cloud Sword Tomb rarely takes the initiative to attack, but we will not let go of the humiliation we received. World Alliance's Qingqing Di. This time, I will let him know whether his fist is stronger, or my Wind Cloud Sword Tomb sword is sharper. In the past, Qingqing Di destroyed Wind Cloud Sword Tomb's formation with one punch, and heavily injured Wind Cloud Sword Tomb's ancestor Zhongli Mu with the second punch. This matter was seen as a humiliation for Wind Cloud Sword Tomb. Since then, no one from Wind Cloud Sword Tomb stepped into the martial world for more than a year, because it was shameful. Zhongli Mu could not seek revenge from Qingqing Di, so he would personally seek revenge from Qingqing Di. However, Yan Ji did not know that he had completely misunderstood Zhongli Mu's intentions. When he had just been defeated by Emperor Qingqing Di, Zhongli Mu had indeed been unwilling and resentful. However, it was also because of Qingqing Di's punch that Zhongli Mu completely thought things through and untied the knot in his heart at the same time. He pointed to his chest, not because he wanted Yan Ji to help him take revenge, but because he wanted Yan Ji to stay true to his heart and not be affected by external things and emotions like him, losing his nature as a swordsman. In the end, he did not expect that because he died too quickly, he could not say what he should have said, and actually caused Yan Ji to misunderstand. Carrying Zhongli Mu's corpse, Yan Ji left the Wind Cloud Sword Tomb. There were already many Wind Cloud Sword Tomb martialists gathered outside. After all, the fluctuations just now were too terrifying. That powerful sword qi that could tear the laws was something they had never seen before. Looking at Zhongli Mu's corpse, everyone's eyes were filled with grief, but they were not surprised. After all, Zhongli Mu was someone who had lived for close to 500 years. Excluding a monster like the old Celestial Master, he was practically the longest-living martialist in the underworld. Ever since he was severely injured by Qingqing Di's punch, Zhongli Mu did not continue to cultivate in seclusion. To him, seclusion was useless at that time. His vitality was being consumed at every moment. Therefore, from then on, the Wind Cloud Sword Tomb martialists were already prepared for the news that Zhongli Mu could pass away at any time. Looking at the crowd below, Yanji said in a deep voice, "In a month, we will attack the World Alliance. Wind Cloud Sword Tomb can only take back what we have lost with our own swords." The eyes of the Wind Cloud Sword Tomb martialists below all bloomed with intense sharpness. Although Wind Cloud Sword Tomb had always been low-key, in reality, the Wind Cloud Sword Tomb martialists were more arrogant than anyone else. It was the same even when they looked at the other major sword sections. Sword King City? A bunch of ignorant people who only treated the sword as a pure killing weapon. Forgetting the Sword Hut? They had some foundation, but they did not have the sharpness of a swordsman. They were too useless. Yunu Palace? Women were not worthy of respect. Hidden Sword Villa? Hydra. Wind Cloud Sword Tomb had never claimed to be the leader of the 5 major sword sections. Even when Sword Sovereign Jianghu was around, they did not call themselves that. However, it was obvious that even if Wind Cloud Sword Tomb did not regard themselves as the leader of the 5 major sword sects, they still regarded themselves as the path of return for the Sword Dao. Now that they were smashed by Qin Di's punch, even their pride was completely shattered. This was what they had lost. Now, they had to rely on themselves to take back what they had lost. A month later, when Yanji had slightly stabilized the power of the Sword Soul, he directly led hundreds of Wind Cloud Sword Tomb disciples towards the World Alliance. Wind Cloud Sword Tomb did not conceal their actions. They just led their people and headed straight for the World Alliance. For Wind Cloud Sword Tomb, they did not need to conceal their actions, nor did they need to use any schemes. This was because of Yanji's existence. In this 1 month, of course, Yanji had completely grasped the power of the Sword Soul. Only then did he know exactly how much power he had obtained. At the same time, he also knew exactly how much Zhongli Mu and his master, Jianghu, had sacrificed in order to obtain this power that was beyond the boundaries of heaven and man. In the end, fate made a fool of people. The people who wanted this power the most were all dead. Instead, he, who did not know anything from the beginning to the end, unexpectedly obtained this power. In front of the World Alliance's entrance, the martial artists of the World Alliance all had faint confidence and pride on their faces. It was not simply pride, but pride for their identity. As a sect that was born in the wilderness, the World Alliance had suffered a lot of discrimination in the early days. Especially those large sects with deep heritage, they actually looked down on the uncivilized people of the World Alliance. The World Alliance was able to achieve what it was today because of Qin Di's pair of iron fists. Not long ago, Qin Di fought his way to Wind Cloud Sword Tomb and severely injured Zhongli Mu. This let the entire underworld know that in this world, there was another supreme expert who could influence the entire situation of the underworld. That person's name was Qin Di. World Alliance's Qin Di. From then on, the World Alliance could be considered to be truly proud and elated. In Qin Di's words, the World Alliance does not bully others, but no one should think about bullying the World Alliance. In a large hall of the World Alliance's headquarters, a middle-aged man held a wine jar. He drank while scratching his head, handling the various chores of the World Alliance. He was the World Alliance's Deputy Alliance Master, Star-Plucking Sword, Fong Qingting. Fong Qingting was previously an abandoned disciple of the Forgetful Sword Hut. He had offended an important figure in the sect and was chased after. He was accidentally rescued by Qin Di, who had yet to establish the World Alliance at that time. He had followed him until now. Originally, the World Alliance did not have a Deputy Alliance Master. However, when Qin Di left more than a year ago, he forcefully gave him the position of Deputy Alliance Master and asked him to help manage the World Alliance. The reason was that the entire World Alliance was made up of uncivilized people. Fong Qingting was the only one who came from a large sect and had experience and ability. If not him, who else could he assign to? Although Fong Qingting complained, as long as it was a task given to him by Qin Di, he would not reject it. That was because his life was given to him by Qin Di. If not for Qin Di, he would have been taken back by the people of the Forgetful Sword Hut and crippled of his martial arts. Moreover, Although his talent was not bad, it was merely not bad. If he cultivated diligently his entire life, he would have reached the peak of the real pellet state. However, after following Qingqing, although Qingqing did not teach him martial arts, he taught him many martial arts, allowing him to step into the true fire's spiritual cultivation state. Just a month ago, Qingqing actually made a trip back and gave him a few things to refine. The power within them was so strong that it was simply unimaginable. It actually loosened the bottleneck that he had not broken through for more than a decade, allowing him to successfully step into the mysterious heaven and earth state. This was a realm that he did not even dare to think about before. A gentleman would die for a bosom friend. Perhaps this was how it felt. Qingqing had given him everything. Now, not to mention managing the World Alliance, even if he wanted his life, he was willing to do it. At that moment, a melodious sword chime suddenly came from outside. A voice resounded throughout the entire World Alliance. Qingqing, come out and die. Chapter 1290. Ever since the World Alliance was established, it had never been attacked by anyone. It wasn't because the World Alliance was strong, but because it wasn't worth it. The World Alliance was ultimately an unruly gang. Everyone in the West Chu underworld knew that Qingqing was a madman. He wouldn't care who dared to provoke him. As long as he set his eyes on you, you wouldn't have an easy time. Therefore, no one would cause trouble for Qingqing unless there was an absolute conflict of interest. It wasn't worth it. When Fang Qingting walked out, he was shocked to see Yanji leading the people of Windcloud Sword Tomb. Previously, when Qingqing heavily injured Zhongli Mu with a punch, Windcloud Sword Tomb didn't cause trouble for the World Alliance again. Fang Qingting thought that the matter was over. He didn't expect them to come looking for trouble again. Most importantly, Fang Qingting had already reached the heaven and earth elemental realm, but he still couldn't see through Yanji's cultivation. He clearly remembered that Yanji should be in the heaven and earth elemental realm like him, but how did Yanji's strength increase so rapidly? Although Fang Qingting was still puzzled, he still stood out and said in a deep voice, "Yanji, what is the meaning of this? Do you still want to fight with the World Alliance?" Yanji said indifferently, "Emperor Qingqing killed my ancestral master and humiliated my Windcloud Sword Tomb. I'm here today to take back what my Windcloud Sword Tomb lost. Where's Qingqing? Does he not even have the guts to stand out?" Fang Qingting snorted coldly. "Yanji, don't you distort the truth. The people of the World Alliance never caused trouble. It was your Windcloud Sword Tomb who bullied the weak and touched the young master of the World Alliance. That's why the Alliance Master attacked. Back when the Alliance Master had attacked Zhongli Mu, he hadn't killed him because he was too old. Now that he's dead, you want to blame it on the Alliance Master? Why don't you say that the person who killed him was someone from a few hundred years ago?" Although Fang Qingting used to be from a respectable sect, he had mingled with the World Alliance for a long time, so he was very good with words. At the very least, Yanji could not win against him in an argument. Therefore, Yanji waved his hand and said in a deep voice, "I'm not here to reason with you today. I've said it before. Let Qingqing come out and die. If he wasn't here, he would kill his disciple. If his disciple wasn't here, I would destroy the entire Heaven Alliance. I don't believe that Qingqing will just sit back and watch as his foundation is destroyed." As Yanji's voice fell, a blurry black dragon behind him roared with a shocking sword intent, causing the void to tremble. Fang Qingting's expression suddenly changed, but before he could say anything, Yanji had already waved his hand and shouted, "Kill!" Just as he said before, he was not here to reason with Fang Qingting. He had already blamed Zhongli Mu's death on Qingqing. He had even misunderstood Zhongli Mu's intentions, so he had to kill Qingqing to take revenge. Since Qingqing wasn't here, he would destroy the Heaven Alliance first. In fact, even Yanji himself did not realize that ever since he merged with the Sword Soul, Yanji's personality had become extremely cold and arrogant. In the past, Yanji's personality was actually not that strong. However, now that he was going to destroy the entire Heaven Alliance just to find Qingqing, He did not feel the slightest burden or pressure in his heart. Fang Qingting's eyes were filled with despair as he watched the people from Windcloud's sword tomb make their move. He was very clear about the Heaven Alliance's strength. Apart from Emperor Qinqing, there was also him, who had been brought up by Emperor Qinqing all the way. In fact, there were not many experts. After all, the Heaven Alliance had only been around for a short period of time. They were born in the wilderness, so the gap in their foundation was a big problem. If he did not include Qinqing Di, how could he defeat the cultivators from Windcloud Sword Tomb? Therefore, Fang Qingting instantly made a decision. He shouted at the people behind him, "Run! Run to the Kunlun Devil Cult's branch in the southern barbarian land and ask for help." He did not know where Qinqing Di went. He only knew that Qinqing Di had a very close relationship with the leader of the Kunlun Devil Cult, Chu Xiu. Furthermore, Chu Xiu was good friends with their young master, Xie Xiaolu. In the current world, only the Kunlun Devil Cult was not afraid of Windcloud Sword Tomb and was still willing to protect the Heaven Alliance. However, even if the other people from the Heaven Alliance escaped, Fang Qingting could not. If he escaped, how could he be worthy of Qinqing Di's kindness? How could he be worthy of the Heaven Alliance? Fang Qingting unsheathed the sword in his hand and stabbed out. The light of the stars, the sun, and the moon were all overshadowed by the sharpness of his sword. It was extremely dazzling. Yan Ji raised his eyebrows and said, "Forgetting Sword Hut's lunisolar and galaxy sword technique? Unfortunately, although your strength is not bad, you are not a qualified swordsman. Swords should not be used like this. What's the point of making so many fancy things?" Yan Ji did not have a sword in his hand, but he only pointed his finger lightly, and the light gathered by Fang Qingting's sword had already exploded. Fang Qingting immediately spat out a mouthful of blood and was sent flying. In front of a martial immortal, even the Elysium was as weak as an ant. Yan Ji walked forward and looked down at Fang Qingting, who was lying on the ground. He said calmly, "I only want to avenge my ancestor. I don't want to kill the innocent. Tell me where Qinqing Di is." If you can live, the people of the Heaven Alliance can also live. Fang Qingting spat out a mouthful of spittle mixed with blood at Yan Ji. He cursed, "F*****, Pucci." A soft sound rang out, and Fang Qingting's forehead was directly pierced by a sword aura. "Stubborn fool." At this moment, a martial artist from Windcloud Sword Tomb walked over and said in a low voice, "Sir, there are too many people from the Heaven Alliance. They only want to escape. We only killed 30% of them, and we can't catch up with the rest. These people are all fleeing towards the south. They should be heading towards the Kunlun Devil Cult's branch in the southern barbarian land. Should we still chase after them?" Yan Ji frowned slightly. Kunlun Devil Cult? Chu Xiu? Actually, the hatred between Windcloud Sword Tomb and Kunlun Devil Cult was not that big. One of the reasons was that Windcloud Sword Tomb was very low profile. Most of the martial artists cultivated in the Sword Tomb and would not step out of the pugilistic world. They did not pay much attention to the difference between the righteous and the evil. It was only when Chu Xiu occupied the Kunlun Mountain and wanted to rebuild the Kunlun Devil Cult that Zhong Limu made a move once. Moreover, ever since Chu Xiu destroyed the Great Light Temple and the Sabodhi Monastery, the Kunlun Devil Cult's momentum of dominating the pugilistic world had already begun to show. This caused all the major sects to be extremely vigilant. However, there was still a difference between the Kunlun Devil Cult that Chu Xiu was in charge of and the Kunlun Devil Cult that Dugu Weiwei was in charge of 500 years ago. 500 years ago, Dugu Weiwei's Kunlun Devil Cult was that those who obeyed it would prosper, and those who opposed it would perish. But now, the Kunlun Devil Cult that Chu Xiu was in charge of was not so overbearing, but it began to advance step by step, nibbling away some of the forces in the pugilistic world. Now, the entire South China was occupied. Although there were some knowledgeable people who thought that it was necessary to eradicate Chu Xiu as soon as possible. Otherwise, when the Kunlun Devil Cult grew stronger again, there would be endless troubles in the future. But since the destruction of the Buddhism sect, who dared to start another war between the righteous and the evil? Under normal circumstances, Windcloud Sword Tomb did not dare and did not want to provoke Chu Xiu. But now, the powerful power brought by the fusion of the sword's soul gave Yan Ji confidence. Last time when Chu Xiu destroyed the Sabodhi Zen monastery, Yan Ji was also a spectator. At that time, he had already stepped into the mysterious realm of heaven and earth. He also had to admit that in the mysterious realm of heaven and earth, Chu Xiu was almost invincible. But now, he had stepped into another world. Even if it was the devil lord Chu Xiu, would he be able to fight? Let's go to South China. Yan Ji waved his hand and led the other martial artists all the way to South China. The movement caused by Windcloud Sword Tomb was huge. On the second day, the entire West Chu martial arts world knew about it. For so many years, Windcloud Sword Tomb had rarely ventured out. However, this time, when he did, he caused a huge commotion. Within a day, he defeated the World Alliance. Emperor Qin Qingdi of the World Alliance was nowhere to be found, and Deputy Alliance Master Fang Qingting was killed on the spot. Of course, this was not the most shocking thing. The most shocking thing was that Yan Ji actually went straight to South China and pointed his sword at the Kunlun Devil Cult's branch hall in South China. Since Chu Xiu destroyed the North and South Buddhist sects, almost no one in the entire martial arts world dared to go against him. Now, Windcloud Sword Tomb actually dared to provoke the Kunlun Devil Cult. This made everyone feel that either Windcloud Sword Tomb was crazy, or they had some unknown trump card. At this time, in the branch hall of South China, Chu Wuji leisurely moved a chair and sat outside to bask in the sun. Chu Xiu and the others were still in closed-door cultivation. Chu Wuji was also in closed-door cultivation previously. But with the special soul crystals brought by Chu Xiu, he successfully stepped into mysterious heaven and earth. He did not continue his closed-door cultivation, but returned to the lower realm to guard the branch hall. At the same time, he also took care of the construction progress of the branch hall in the lower realm. Of course, he was bored in closed-door cultivation, so he prepared to return to the lower realm to rest. In fact, although Chu Wuji was not that kind of lazy character, he was not the kind of madman who only focused on cultivation. Most of the time, he still held an attitude of letting nature take its course. Previously, the hidden devil lineage needed him to hold up the facade, so he naturally had to be tense. Now that there was Chu Xiu, he could also take a break from his busy schedule. Tanya, who was taking turns to rest in the upper realm, also came to Chu Wuji's side at this time. He smiled and said, "Lord Chu, did you learn this from Old Wei? You like to bask in the sun so much." Chu Wuji glanced at Tanya and said lightly, "When you reach my age, you will know how comfortable it is to take a break from your busy schedule to bask in the sun. Of course, don't learn from me. Following official Chu, your current strength is far from the peak. By the way, I heard that you seem to have some grudges with the Tang sect in Sichuan. Haven't you thought of going back after so many years?" Tanya was considered to be relatively young and had more potential among the martial artists under Chu Xiu's command. Relying on the Daluotian environment, he had already reached the true fire spirit refinement realm. Tanya chuckled and said, "The past is like smoke." After following official Chu for so many years, I have already let go of the past. Just when Chu Wuji wanted to say something, a martial artist from the Kunlun Devil Cult suddenly ran over and said loudly, "Lord Chu, the World Alliance has come to ask for help." Chapter 1291. The Kunlun demon cult had already set up many branches in the southern barbarian land. When the Heavens Union's martial artists just appeared here, they were already discovered by the Kunlun demon cult's martial artists and knew the details of the matter. Hearing that World Alliance had been destroyed and that Yan Ji and the other warriors of Storm Sword Tomb were heading towards them, Chu Wuji felt that something was wrong. It was normal for Storm Sword Tomb to take advantage of Qin Qingdi's absence to attack World Alliance. After all, they had just been humiliated by Qin Qingdi. However, they knew that World Alliance had come to Kunlun Devil Cult to seek protection, yet they still dared to make a move. Where did their confidence come from? Ever since Chu Xiu destroyed the North and South Buddhist sects, it had been a long time since anyone dared to touch Kunlun Devil Cult's tiger whiskers. Chu Wuji had interacted with Storm Sword Tomb before. Although this sect was low-key, they weren't idiots. They probably had something to rely on for doing this. Chu Wuji immediately turned to Tang Ye and said, "Quickly return to Daluotian and inform sect leader Chen and sect leader Chun of this matter." Tang Ye was astonished. "It's just Storm Sword Tomb, it shouldn't be so serious, right?" Chu Wuji shook his head. "I'm not sure, but my intuition tells me that something isn't right. Moreover, World Alliance has been destroyed. No matter what, we have to inform sect leader Chen." Tang Ye also knew the relationship between Qinqing Di and Kunlun Devil Cult. He nodded and immediately returned to Daluotian to inform. At the same time, Chu Wuji called Grandmaster Yuan Ji and Phantom King Chowing over. "Can the two of you use the formation of the Lower Realms Branch Palace?" Grandmaster Yuan Ji said, "We can use it, but sect leader told us to focus on the Daluotian side. So, the formation of the Lower Realm isn't complete yet." Phantom King Chowing said impatiently, "Even if it's not complete, it's enough to block a heaven and earth profound understanding peak opponent. Why are you being so careful? The Kunlun Devil Cult is so strong. Who in the lower realm can be our match?" Although Chowing joined the Kunlun Devil Cult because he was threatened by Chu Xiu, the feeling of being invincible was really good. Unlike back in Eastern Qi, when he was designing a formation, he would have to consider whether it would be able to block that formation or this formation. He would be frustrated by all the questions. At this moment, Yan Ji's voice rang out from outside the Kunlun Devil Cult's branch palace. "Yan Ji of Windcloud Sword Mound requests an audience with Kunlun Cult Master Chu." The voice reverberated through the entire Kunlun Devil Cult subhall. After Chu Wuji heard it, his expression suddenly changed. Chu Wuji was not Fong Qingting. He could only sense that Yan Ji was very powerful, but he could not sense his opponent's exact strength. He had seen a martial immortal in the Daluotian, a real martial immortal. At that moment, when Yan Ji spoke, Chu Wuji could tell from his voice that he was a genuine martial immortal. But a martial immortal could be born in the lower realm? And it was Yan Ji. In his memory, although Yan Ji's strength was not bad, it was impossible for him to be faster than Yi Shaonan, an old celestial master. He had actually stepped into the martial immortal realm just like that. Strictly speaking, Yan Ji should have been a martial artist at the same level as Chu Wuji. Chu Wuji did not have time to think so much. He stood up and said in a deep voice, "The cult master Chu is not in the Southern Man Branch Palace. Why did the Windcloud Sword Mound come here?" Yan Ji said indifferently, "Heaven Alliance's Qinqing Di killed my ancestor, Zhong Limu. Naturally, I came today to take revenge. Don't say you don't know that the Heaven Alliance's martial artists came to the Southern Man Branch Palace of the Kunlun Devil Cult. The Windcloud Sword Mound has no intention of becoming enemies with the Kunlun Devil Cult. As long as the Kunlun Devil Cult hand over the person, the Windcloud Sword Mound will immediately retreat." Chu Wuji said in a deep voice, "The Heaven Alliance's Qinqing Di has a friendly relationship with the Holy Cult. I will not hand over this person. Moreover, no one can take him away from the Holy Cult. Yan Ji, I don't know how you stepped into the martial immortal realm, but I have to advise you not to be too complacent. You've already destroyed the Heaven Alliance. Are you still going to kill us all?" Yan Ji's face revealed a surprised expression. "You actually know about the martial immortal realm?" However, soon after, Yan Ji came to a realization. The foundation of the Kunlun demon sect was frighteningly deep. In fact, Dugu Weiwa himself was a martial immortal level existence. Thus, it was not strange for him to know about this matter. Towards this matter, Yan Ji wasn't too bothered. He only laughed coldly. "Your Kunlun demon sect has done a lot of things like exterminating clans and clans. But today, you're telling me to let people off when possible? What a joke. Since Chu Xiu isn't here, then just as well. Hand him over." Chu Wuji squinted his eyes and said, "I've said it before. No one can take anyone away from the holy cult. Not even a martial immortal?" Yan Ji's eyes revealed a hint of coldness. Chu Wuji sneered disdainfully, "Frog at the bottom of a well. Do you really think that the martial immortal realm is the peak? You don't even have the qualification to see the bigger world." Chu Wuji's disdain was genuine. So what if he was a martial immortal? Yan Beifeng, who was a fourth-layer martial immortal, died in the hands of Chu Xiu. The blissful Devil Palace, one of the southern region's great demon sects, was also destroyed by Chu Xiu. Although Chu Wuji did not witness the battle in the Middle Province with his own eyes, he had heard that Chu Xiu used only 2 moves to kill the Brahma sect's new martial immortal, Xen Jialua. So what if he was a martial immortal? His holy cult's cult master Chu had killed more than 1 or 2 martial immortals. Yan Ji was not qualified to show off in the Kunlun devil cult with just this bit of strength. Chu Wuji's gaze seemed to have pierced Yan Ji. Yan Ji's eyes immediately revealed a hint of anger. He swept his hand with a sword energy. The roar of a black dragon shook the entire heaven and earth. It even caused the surrounding chi of heaven and earth to disperse. At that instant, Chu Wuji was certain that his opponent was definitely a martial immortal. "Open the formation!" Chu Wuji shouted. Actually, before Chu Wuji shouted, Master Yuan Ji and Chao Shen had already opened the formation. The radiance of the 4 symbols flowed within the green formation. However, the next moment, it was shattered by the sword energy. In an instant, Chao Shen and Master Yuan Ji's expressions changed. The mission that Chu Xiu gave them was to build a formation that could protect the lower region's sub-palace. To Master Yuan Ji and Chao Shen, a formation that could withstand a peak heaven and earth elemental enlightenment was already powerful enough. Who would have thought that it could not even withstand a single sword attack? The second formation rose again. The power of the 5 elements flowed and changed. Although it was the simplest formation of the 5 elements, it was mutually reinforcing and restraining, fusing and changing. There were hundreds of changes. This formation was built to prevent the opponent from destroying the first formation by relying on numbers. It was a backup plan. However, under Yan Ji's sword, it shattered once again. It was extremely miserable. Although there was only a fine line of difference between a martial immortal and a peak heaven and earth elemental enlightenment, it was like the difference between heaven and man. Master Yuan Ji and Chao Shen erected the third formation. This formation shone brightly. There was even a trace of the rootless sacred flame's power within it. This formation was also the last one to protect the sub-palace. It was also the strongest one. If one went deeper, it would be the passageway between the 2 realms. As such, Chao Shen and Master Yuan Ji used their full strength to fuse a trace of the rootless sacred flame's power into it. When Chu Wuji saw this, he suddenly stood up and went outside the formation. Master Yuan Ji was shocked when he saw this, and he quickly said, "Lord Chu, what are you doing?" Chu Wuji said in a deep voice, "Are you sure this final formation can withstand a single sword attack from Yan Ji? If I don't stall for time, who will protect the items in the sub-palace?" Master Yuan Ji knew what Chu Wuji meant. Once this formation was broken, the passageway between the 2 realms would be exposed to Yan Ji. Now that Chu Xiu was planning to break the heavenly gates, no one could find out. Yan Ji looked at Chu Wuji in surprise. "Since you know that I'm a martial immortal, you still dare to stand up? Do you want to die?" Chu Wuji grinned. "Of course I want my life. However, ever since Cult Master Chu took over the holy cult, we have never given in even once. Others can't, and neither can you, Yan Ji. Now that the cult master isn't here, I'm in charge. If I let you break the sub-palace and take the people away, wouldn't I lose face? After all, I rely on my face to make a living. I can lose my life, but I can't lose my face." The astonishment in Yan Ji's eyes deepened. He had not expected that there would be such a character in the Kunlun demon sect. "You're so stubborn." As Yan Ji's voice rang out, the black dragon's roar grew louder. The black sword chi pierced through the sun, moon, mountains and rivers, heading straight for Chu Wuji. The powerful aura was enough to make one's heart tremble. Chu Wuji slashed the crescent blade in his hand. His chi and blood erupted almost at the same time. The powerful force instantly penetrated the crescent blade, causing the blood moon in the sky to shine brightly. Unfortunately, the difference in strength between them was too great. The crescent blade in his hand was shattered in one move. In the next moment, Chu Wuji acted as if he didn't see this scene. He actually took the initiative to rush towards Yanji. His hands formed a seal, and moonlight floated up. Extreme sharpness shone from beneath Yanji's feet as he charged towards him. However, Yanji took a step forward and a powerful aura exploded. It instantly tore the gleam apart. At the same time, a sword aura shot out from his hand and sent Chu Wuji flying again. Chu Wuji's strength was much stronger than Fang Qingting's. He took a martial immortal expert sword aura head-on and was only seriously injured. He did not die. However, at that moment, Yanji had already descended from the sky. He once again released a sword aura. At this moment, there was a huge fluctuation in the entire southern Man-Branch Palace. The rootless sacred flame burst forth and instantly blocked in front of Yanji, causing his sword chi to dissipate completely. Yanji looked at the rootless sacred flame in shock. He recognized it. It was the rootless sacred flame that burned at the peak of Kunlun Mountain. However, the question was, how did the Kunlun devil cult move the rootless sacred flame here? Feeling the power coming from the rootless sacred flame, even with Yanji's current strength, he could not extinguish it. After taking a deep look at Chu Wuji behind the rootless sacred flame, Yanji waved his hand and left with his people. After Yanji left, the rootless sacred flame suddenly extinguished. Master Yuan Ji and Chao Ying walked out from behind the formation. Both of them looked like they had been hollowed out. Chao Ying cursed, "The formation that took half a year to make is completely ruined." You're tuning in to the Han Li's Immortal Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.